you want to, we can leave your
Friends behind. Because the friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, the friends of mine. We can dance. We can dance. Everybody, look at your hands.
Okay, we have a Chris back.
Good dance.
Chris, we have a potential solution, but I already forgot what you had to do. Ben, what does he have to do?
Lock the rotation.
Oh,
Lock the orientation.
yeah. Can you lock the rotation on your phone and then
Rotate. Lock.
and then wait? Rotate first and then lock, or lock and then? Oh, it worked.
It's a
There we
setting
go.
on the, yeah,
That works.
you pull down.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
At
So
least
that'll
if
work.
you have a droid and it's
All right.
user-friendly.
Well, it mostly worked.
It seems to
you
be a
alright with
really
that?
stable connection too, so that's great.
Can't you just like zoom in on like the thing?
Safety dance.
Cool. All right, it looks pretty good, Chris. We're gonna see if we can optimize that a little bit on our end, but I think you sound okay as well, so that's good.
All right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had to decide whether I was going to do this from home or from my office, and I don't know. I figure my home Wi-Fi should be good enough.
Yeah. So we are live to the world, but our show hasn't started yet. So we're in a kind of pre-show phase. We're just having a chat and,
Yep.
making sure all our tech's working, and then we'll start the show proper in about 4 minutes.
All right. So I have my phone in like you put your phone in like a little like wallet thing that flips over and covers the screen. So I have that like balanced on top of my laptop. So I don't know. I've done stuff like that before. But the thing with these new like iPhones is that they don't.
yeah.
You either plug in like headpiece, your headphones, or you plug in the power.
Yeah.
You can't plug in both anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's on like 99% charge. I'm pretty sure my phone will last for the next hour.
Cool. Well, if we get a random dropout, we'll just be like, power density of batteries can't be controlled.
Nice.
It's all good. So Space Mike will be doing your interview today, Chris. So
All right.
you can probably see him waving to you there. We do a news segment first. So we'll do our open of the show, and then we'll go into a news segment that lasts approximately 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then what we used to do was run a commercial break and do your interview after that, but we're trying this new thing this week where we'd love to do a kind of lightning round with you before we head into the commercial break as like a taster of
Yeah.
what the interview is going to be like.
And it's not even so much related to what the topic that we're going to be talking about today. It's just more of general questions to kind of get to know you as a person.
Just to break the ice.
Breaking the
Yeah,
ice.
exactly. Icebreakers.
Breaking the ice.
Okay.
But yeah, I wanted to ask you a bunch of questions, and don't answer right now because we'll get into this in the interview. But I wanted to ask you a lot about Secure World Foundation and your internship at ANUSA and the different projects you've done in Africa and all sorts of stuff with ITAR and EAR and all the satellite changes a couple of years ago where a lot of stuff was transferred over to EAR. And if there's anything else in particular that you wanted to talk about or not talk about, let me know.
Okay, let me think here. So with ITAR and the revisions for ITAR, like I'm no export control expert. I generally know, some of that stuff where they basically took it off the presumptive denial list to the presumptive approval list. But in terms of like what's actually in the CFRs and like what's it Part 15 and like what's actually controlled technology, I'm no expert in that. I only know like generally the revision for how they've taken a look at ITAR as did it actually restrict things it shouldn't be restricting?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me think. And then, you said, I've written papers about space in Africa and I've been to a couple conferences there, but the rest of Secure World has done more stuff in Africa and with Africa for, like basic space technology and also, uses space and remote sensing for, environmental security, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Have there been any other countries that you have helped to set up any particular projects that you would like to talk about?
No, usually when I go to, usually the events that I go to are more high-level policy discussions and international law discussions that then play into, like what nations are going to try to decide to do in space. I know I was at a lunar development conference in Japan earlier this year, and I told them, And people kind of looked at me like, well, Chris, yeah, are you sure you want to say that? And I said, please, Japan, do not sign the moon agreement. It will not benefit you if you sign the moon agreement to develop lunar activities. And that's as far as like recommendations that I make towards states is like, from my perspective of my understanding of international law and what other states want to do in space and do on celestial bodies. I say, maybe you don't want to go towards becoming a party to the moon agreement, stuff like that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, great. That gives me a good idea of what to ask and what not to ask. So this is going to be fun.
And there's always so much discussions about like Space Force. I've handled interviews and questions about Space Force. We can talk about that stuff too. That's like a real good mix of law and policy of what the law requires and what the Outer Space Treaty requires versus what's a good decision for the U.S. government to do or the effect that it will have geopolitically.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, good. This is going to be fun. And again, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Later today, I'm off to the IAC in Bremen. So a lot of folks are headed towards Bremen, today and tomorrow for IAC next week.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. I wish I was going.
Well, next year it will be in Washington, D.C.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah. So definitely make it to that. I think that's going to be really excellent.
Perfect.
We're going to start just a couple minutes late.
Okay. Yeah, my biggest highlight for all the IACs is when all the different heads of the different space agencies get together for that big panel that they sit on. Those are always my biggest highlights. A lot of people talk about the BFR updates that Elon's given over the past 2 years, but oh man, when all the heads of the space agencies get together, that's when my nerd brain starts firing on all cylinders.
Oh. Yeah, because you realize like all the people on that stage, the decisions they make, and like they're at the forefront of making actual decisions for what's going to happen in outer space. And you also kind of see that they're kind of space nerds too. Like they get excited about it. Like Jean-Jacques Dardan always got quite excited. Jan Warner gets excited about space. Charlie Bolden always was excited about space.
I really miss Igor Komarov.
Those are good panels.
Komarov was definitely a big space fan too. I don't know how I feel about Rogozin now, but yeah.
Oh yeah.
the previous president of Roscosmos, I really liked him.
I don't have any clear memories of even seeing him speak, but I've seen Rogozin speak in person, and
really,
I mean, yeah, he has a different approach to it because I don't actually know that guy's background. I don't know if he's from like military or not.
Rogozin?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely military background. And he was the, I think he was I want to say he was the deputy prime minister before his current post now to Roscosmos. And I'm sure you remember his famous statement several years ago when he was just like, soon the Soyuz is the only way for NASA to get to space. You guys might as well be launching on a trampoline.
yeah, he definitely said that. And also like the recent story that's spinning around of like some type of sabotage on the ISS.
Yeah.
I don't know all the details of how. I'd like to really track where the source of that story, and then who like repeated that story and where it got traction, and then from
the stuff that I saw, it was really interesting.
I was over in Russia when that happened.
Oh, really? Wow. From what I saw, it seemed like the original claim that, maybe it was one of the astronauts, came from Rogozin. And then, like, literally 2 days later, it was just like, no, this was something on the ground, and the people responsible have been penalized, and this will be taken care of. It's fine, but there's an ongoing investigation, blah, blah, blah. But the initial rumor was started from Rogozin. He's such a propagandist. I kind of hate him.
Well, so the thing about stuff like that is, it's very easy. There's a lot of misunderstanding between the U.S. and Russia, and it's easy to assume or impute bad intentions of, they said that, but what did they really mean? Even when, the U.S. says we want to go back to the moon, or we'd like to do commercial space resources, or we'd like to do satellite servicing. if you can be a cynic about what we say if you're from another country and go, that's what they said, but what are they really up to? What is that X-37B really up to?
Exactly.
And we can also have that same type of cynicism or slightly paranoid perspective from, say, what Rogozin says. But, you have to understand, or I don't know, I'm willing to give people more the benefit, maybe heads of agencies, they don't know the repercussions and how things can spiral. Because if he retracted a few days later, I mean, I never ever want to assume bad intentions by what people say. I want like clear proof. I want to know more.
Yeah.
I mean, and like put yourself in their shoes. If you're a Russian, you're very proud and rightfully proud of everything they've done in space, like the list of firsts. It's like tied into their identity. So
Absolutely.
that's one of the big rules.
That's one of the big rules that we have on this show is to debate the idea, not the person.
Oh yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's excellent. Actually, that's the way debate should happen. Exactly.
Oh man. But yeah, I'm
so
excited. Go ahead.
I want to know what's going on. Let's see, like they're starting to tape the show now, and that's happening now. What's the?
We're starting a little bit late. I'm not sure what the delay is, but we should be starting here momentarily. We should have started already. And then once we're ready to go, we'll have a quick news segment. We'll cover launches that happened this week, and then a handful of news stories, and then our lightning round. We'll go to a commercial break after that, and then come back and do the interview.
Okay. Let me think here.
Are you on a time crunch?
I know it was. I know I'm totally good for time. I know that like like questions about. I saw like what the link is and the title for today's episode. Can you get arrested in space? So I'm not an expert in, say, like what's in the ISS code of conduct. There's very few people that are actual experts in what's in that code of conduct. They're the people that work at space agencies. I know that like human spaceflight is the most interesting thing, and that's what people may assume to and jump to about arrest in space for some type of crime happening in space. But that's not really, it's not really my strong suit. My strong suit is more like pure international law, the Outer Space Treaty, Astronaut Agreement, Registration Convention, Liability Convention, Moon Agreement, and like geopolitical perspectives. Although I can field like, how something would happen on station or in other human space flight scenarios where there's a criminal issue.
Oh, okay. Hang on, my director, I think, has something that he wanted to bring up.
What's your plan for the cold open?
For the cold open, I was just going to say, I'm here with Chris Johnson from the Secure World Foundation. We'll be talking about lots of interesting space laws and space policies.
That's not catchy enough.
By the way, if you have a better suggestion for the title for this episode, our ears are open.
So right now the title is Can You Get Arrested in Space?
Yeah, and he was just talking about that, how he can't necessarily speak so much on that, but we could talk hypotheticals of what could actually happen if someone were to do something at the ISS or other things related with human spaceflight.
That's fine. It's really more of a just to get people thinking about this, because this isn't something that people people don't think about space law. They don't think about some of the ramifications of this stuff, and the title is purely to get them thinking about, like, oh, I never considered what happens when something falls from space. What happens if I try to own part of the moon? What happens if I try to do whatever? So we're just trying to get that thought process going. So we want to do something similar in the cold open where we get them thinking about, like, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. So, like, I'm not entirely sure what it is here. Because
I would suggest something like what is allowed in space or what is not allowed in space. Can you do that in space?
Mm-hmm. So just in like what is allowed in space, can you do that in space? What isn't allowed in space?
Yeah.
I like can you do that in space?
What is and isn't allowed in space, and what we...
Can you do that in space?
Yeah, can you do that? Well, can you do that in space? I was also going to say something along the lines of, like, what needs to change policy-wise? Although that's boring. So no, can you do that in space? Work that somehow in there. Just, and we're going to be talking about what you can and can't do in space or something like that. And then I'd also like to focus on for the interview itself, we should touch on what we need to change, because I think a lot of this, a lot of space law was done decades ago when we just didn't know, like there was no thought of like where we're at right now. So making sure that we kind of touch on where we're at today, what needs to change, and what some of the benefits that would be. All right, I think you got a good handle on it. And then you're aware that after the Patreon slates, in the first segment, we're going to toss to you. You're going to do your the 60-second thing. We've got the count on the music. It's going to be awesome. And then you're going to toss to the calendar break, and we're going to come back straight to you. Yep? Cool. Any questions on how to get in and out of that?
I think I'm good. Yeah, I should be good. Are we still holding for?
No, we're not. You're the last one. So
Okay.
as soon as you're ready to go, we're going.
All right,
Ready?
let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Y'all ready?
Here we go, everybody.
Welcome to tomorrow. We've got a killer show lined up for you today. Athena, what are you excited about?
Because United Launch Alliance has chosen its engine for its new Vulcan rocket, and it burns the same gas that your oven at home burns.
Awesome. And what about you, Jade?
Well, we actually just got a whole bunch of unprecedented data from distant stars that uncovers more insights about our own sun. And the more we know about our own sun, well, hey, the more we know about space weather, the more we can mitigate a potential doomsday.
And I know how much sunscreen I need to put on. And we have Space Mike on the observation deck. What do you got for us, Space Mike?
Everyone, I am going to be talking with Chris Johnson from the Secure World Foundation about what you can do in space, what you can't do in space, what you might get in trouble for in space, and what needs to change so that everyone can go to space.
And then after that, we have your community comments. This is tomorrow, Orbit 11.38.
Good morning. How's everything up in the sky?
And thanks for sticking with us there. Now, we always like to start our shows with the coolest part of space, which is rocket launches. So, Athena, did we have any rocket launches this week?
We did. Okay, so we're going to start out with the Ariane 5 rocket. So the European launch provider Ariane.Space had its 100th launch of the Ariane 5 rocket. It launched from the Guiana Space Center in Kourou, French Guiana, on September 25th at 22:38 Coordinated Universal Time. Now, it launched two telecom satellites. One is the Horizons 3E satellite manufactured by Boeing, which separated from the rocket's upper stage 28 minutes after launch, followed by the Intelsat 38 Azer Space 2 from Space Systems L'Oreal 14 minutes later. And this was Ariane.Space's 6th mission of the year, and with it being the 100th Ariane 5 launch, that means it's time to make some room for the next generation of the Ariane rocket, which is the Ariane 6, which will begin launching in 2020. Which is really cool because both Ariane 5 and Ariane 6 will be launching coincidingly for 3 years until 2023. Now, these satellites are really cool. The Horizons 3E is considered to be the most advanced satellite by the Intelsat CEO Steven Spengler actually says, which is really cool because it's going to be able to give a lot of different details. So the next launch is going to be from China, and it had a launch of its Kaizhou 1A rocket from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center. This was on Saturday morning at 4:13 Coordinated Universal Time. It launched the SentiSpace 1S1 small satellite, which will be in Earth-Sun synchronous orbit at an altitude of 700 kilometers. Now, right now, the use of the satellite is actually unknown, but assumptions being made it is going to be used for some type of Earth observations. Now, this launch vehicle that was used is really cool because it can be used with two different types of fairings. One is with a diameter of 1.2 meters and one with 1.4 meters, well, depending on its cargo. Now, the manufacturer of this space vehicle is X-Space Technology Co., which is actually a branch of China's Aerospace Science and Industry Corp. Oh man, now look at that launch. Isn't that just so beautiful? It has actually the capability of launching 200 kilogram payload into sun-synchronous orbit at 700 kilometers.
Woohoo! Good job, Athena! Nice work! That was your first time doing Launch Minute, right?
That was. I was shaking the entire
You
time.
did an amazing job. It was so cool.
That was splendid.
Oh my goodness. Now,
Delicious.
you talked about the Ariane 5 launch,
Yes.
which I was actually watching the webcast for. It was really, really cool and interesting webcast.
Yeah.
Why was that exciting for you?
Well, I'm really excited about this because Ariane 5 is actually going to be launching at the same time as the Ariane 6, which is going to be the next generation rocket. And they're going to be launching for about 3 years at the same time together. So 2020 to 2023. And I think the comparisons will be really cool to kind of see which clients will actually be wanting to launch on each vehicle.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what does that bring our total launches for this year up to for the different countries?
So our total launches, as you guys can see here, that now makes China at 26 launches. And then you have the United States at 24 launches. Now you can see also Russia is at 10 launches, and then you have Japan, which is at 5. And then you got Europe at 5, India at 4, and New Zealand at 1. So
Yay, New
I'm
Zealand.
really excited about that. Yeah, definitely. I think China's still surpassing everyone right now, as you guys can see here.
Well, the Chinese launch that we just had then, that was kind of a surprise launch too. We didn't know
Yes.
that was happening this week.
Yeah.
We're kind of scrambling last minute to get video media for that too, right?
Yeah, I think it was last night around like 10 p.m. That was really cool. So that was really awesome, actually.
Yeah, I was excited
watch
about
it.
the payloads on that as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the satellites and everything that's going into space.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So that was launches. And Jade, speaking of things that we put out into the solar system and things that we can get back from the solar system.
Heyo, good one.
What's going on?
Yes. So recently, some scientists from the New York University in Abu Dhabi actually were able to gather data from 40 stars similar to mass than our own sun, and get this, they were able to study something called differential rotation. Essentially,
Wait, what's differential rotation?
good question. It's
I
a
don't
little
know
bit
what
of
that
a
is.
mouthful, but it's basically the phenomenon where if you have a body that's not solid, essentially as it rotates, the equator will rotate at a different rate than another latitude, or especially its poles. Our own sun does this because it's made of a plasma. It's not just like a really hot rock, as we all know. It's a hot gas. And so as it rotates fast at the equator than mid-latitudes. And we thought our sun was kind of unique in this, but actually not quite. 13 of the 40 stars that were observed were actually shown to have differential rotations that are actually even more pronounced than our own sun.
How do you, if it's so far away, then how can you even, like, okay, so tiny point of light, how
Yes.
can you measure that point of light is spinning?
I'm so glad you asked. So we actually use NASA's Kepler telescope, which we all know as the lovely exoplanet hunting telescope, but they actually use Kepler data to be able to look at differential rotation. And the way that it did this was it studied something called, similar to the Doppler effect, what it does is it actually measures waves that travel throughout the stars, and that causes the ever slightest change in brightness. So as you know, when we look for exoplanets, we look for a slight dip in brightness when it transits its star. Essentially, we did that with waves that are propagating within the star itself.
Wow.
And yeah, absolutely, wow. And this is really cool because our own sun, to give you an idea, rotates about 11% faster at the equator than it does mid-latitude. So it takes about 25 days for one rotation at the equator versus 31 days at the mid-latitude, and then it's actually even more pronounced when you get to the poles. However, they were studying stars that were up to 2.5 times faster at rotation in their equators than their poles. So basically, imagine this. Imagine you live at the equator on Earth, and essentially you would experience 2 sunrises and 2 sunsets a day.
Ooh.
Yes. And so to kind of illustrate what differential rotation looks like, Detta just put up a photo on the screen here. And as you can see, it's more pronounced at the equator than the latitudes going up or down. And I'm glad you mentioned how we were able to make such detailed observations. The prior method was we actually used star spots at different latitudes, or Doppler imaging.
Star spots because they're not on the sun, so you
Get
can't
it?
call them sunspots.
Yeah, you know? Our sun is our sun. It is special, and it gets that special word. Or Doppler imaging to track the migration of these, the latitude of these different magnetic features, including sunspots, or star spots, as I should say. But as you could probably imagine, most stars are a little bit too far away to really discern these types of surface features with any clear resolution. So scientists use a method called astroseismology, which is as exciting as it sounds. And again, like I said, looked at how waves travel through stars, causing very tiny dips in the star's brightness, but enough to be able to surmise those different rates.
Well, there's a really good question in the chat room, actually, from Strati.
Yeah.
So they want to know, like, we know that it's spinning differently.
Yes.
But does this depend on the mass of the star? Is it temperature dependent, or is it something else that's happening?
So that's a really good question. So a lot of differential rotation actually relates back to convection within a star. So convection is basically the rising and cooling of materials within the star itself. So the fact that these stars do have such a more pronounced rate of rotation, I'm not entirely sure that they've identified a singular mechanism as to why it's so much more pronounced than our own sun, but certainly it would have to do with about the stellar dynamics itself, essentially.
Awesome. Cool. And now that we know that they're spinning, do we know if it affects like the light or the radiation coming out of that star?
This is the exciting part, and this is what I mentioned when we first got to say hi to y'all. Essentially, the relationship between differential rotation and a star's magnetic field are pretty intimately intertwined. So let's imagine our sun. It's this cute ball of gas in the sky. And like I said, it's rotating at different rates. So what that means is if you can imagine a bunch of little magnetic field lines and they're getting all twisted into all these different contortions simply because there's different rotations and it's not just one cohesive, neat pattern. Imagine a rubber band constantly getting stretched and twisted. What's going to happen to the rubber band? It's going to snap.
Yeah.
It's going to snap
in the face.
and it's going to shoot through the
Yeah.
surface of the sun, and that's how we get things like sunspots. That's how we get, coronal mass ejections. It's how we get all sorts of sometimes neat and sometimes violent things that happen on the surface of the sun. And solar weather has a very intimate impact on things that can happen on our own planet, including messing with satellites, as well as even affecting our electrical grids on the surface here.
What's the worst thing that's happened from a solar event? Like, how has it damaged us?
Well, I mean, I think, what was it? Historically, wasn't it not too long ago that there was a recent event that happened that it messed with the GPS of satellites and then even the electrical grid? There was like a blackout. I can't remember the exact time and place, but there have been instances where there were towns or people affected, and because we're so dependent on electrical grids nowadays, and I don't know about you, but I'm pretty darn dependent on my GPS signal.
Yeah, me
There are
too.
so
Yeah.
many things
Me
on the
too.
line here, and so the more we know about these distant stars, the more we can figure out about our own sun, and again, better understand the dynamics within, and potentially mitigate any future quote-unquote scary times.
Awesome. Speaking about learning about our own sun, is there any way that like people at home can safely look at sunspots or observe the sun?
I will say this, public service announcement, never stare directly at the sun, despite what you may have heard on the news. Do not stare at the sun. But they do make special solar sunglasses, which are actually really cool, and they basically have a filter on them so that you can safely look at the sun because it decreases the sun's brightness quite a bit. Oh, look at that! Dad is actually modeling them. Oh, so lovely.
That was amazing.
Oh, that was fleeting. I hope you got a close-up of that. Or if you have a telescope, you can actually put something called a hydrogen alpha filter on that telescope. And again, what that does is it filters away over 99% of the total brightness of the sun, and you can actually discern surface features. So if there's a sunspot that's particularly prominent that day, you too can see it with your own eyes. Without going blind, which is cool.
Yeah, nobody wants to go
love
blind.
these
Safety
alpha filters.
first. It's,
Not today.
Rule one of the show.
Don't die and don't go blind.
Thanks, Jade.
Anytime.
We're going to switch gears a little bit here, and Athena, we learned some pretty cool information about, a rocket that is going to be using the same stuff we use in our kitchen.
Yes, so United Launch Alliance has a new rocket, and it's called the Vulcan rocket. I had to choose this piece because last week I was talking about Vulcan.
Is this the Vulcan thing? Oh.
This is, you were going to do the hand. So this is actually an artist rendition of what the Vulcan rocket is going to look like during liftoff. So it's United Launch Alliance's newest rocket, and they actually just announced that they have decided upon which engine they're going to use for it. So they're going to be using Blue Origin's BE4 engines, which is...
What engine are they using at the moment?
So they're using the RD-180 engines for a lot of their launch vehicles, which are cool. They're fine. They actually produce quite a lot of thrust. They're from Russia, and they actually burn kerosene and oxygen. So that's cool and everything. But I mean, look at this. This is I just love this image so much. This is when it was out on display. But I think what I like so much about this engine is that it actually is powered by liquefied natural gas and liquid oxygen. So this is why earlier I was saying I'm so excited because it's the same gas that is used in your ovens at home. So talk about, going all natural and this movement forward and trying to, really produce what you can that's good for the environment. So I like that it's
thrust do these guys produce?
Oh man, a lot of thrust. So one of these can produce 550,000 pounds of thrust, and this is during
cool.
the hot fire test, which, oh my gosh,
It looks
it's
so
just,
pretty.
It's
oh
gorgeous.
My goodness, it's so powerful.
So powerful. So that's really, really cool. And actually at liftoff, there's going to be two of these engines that are going to be combined for this launch vehicle, the Vulcan launch vehicle. And together combined, they're going to produce 3.8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. So that's going to be used, this is a picture right here you can see, it's going to be used in the first stage of the rocket. So it's also going to have additional strap-on boosters on the side, which are going to be solid fuel boosters by Northrop Grumman. So really depending on kind of like what the payload and the weight and trajectory is, will depend on how many of those strap-on boosters you actually will need. So then that first stage is going to separate. And they're actually looking to make it reusable in a sense.
Wait, a next generation heavy lift rocket that's going to be reusable? Who'd have thought? Sorry. That came out way more snarky than I meant to. So sorry.
Someone didn't have their
enough coffee. But hang on. Let's get into the nitty-gritty details here. How is the Vulcan going to be achieving, reusability?
Yeah, so their goals is to have, I didn't read too much on the specifics, but the goal is to have that first stage try and be actually reused, to have that be salvaged, and then be able to reuse it for future missions. So as you guys saw in the diagram, the second stage is then what's going to be bringing, obviously, the payload into space, and then that first stage, you're looking to actually have it land, potentially, maybe do a vertical landing. I know that the New Glenn, which is part of Blue Origin, New Glenn rocket is looking to do a vertical landing of their first stage. But with United Launch Alliance and their Vulcan rocket, they're looking to do the same. I mean, reusability is definitely important. It's the trend right now. Yeah.
So these engines are getting used not just on the ULA Vulcan rocket, but on Blue Origin as well?
Yeah, so Blue Origin, I mean, since they're the manufacturers of their engine itself, the BE-4 engine, they are looking to also use it on their New Glenn rocket as well. So that's going to be obviously really, really cool. And they're expecting, obviously, to have a pretty heavy payload on that as well. So having that 3.8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff is extremely important. So, yeah, they're looking to use this engine for multiple uses, and again, I just love that it's powered by natural gas, like liquefied natural gas.
Awesome. So we have Destructor 1701 in the chat room talking about reuse. The plan is not first stage reuse, engine block ejection and capture under parachute by a helicopter. Oh
wow! Thank you, Destructor 1701.
That's very.
So I guess different
Mission
companies
Impossible.
are pursuing reusability.
Yeah, was that for the New Glenn or was that for the Vulcan?
That's for Vulcan.
For Vulcan, okay, for Vulcan, yeah. So I mean, it's really cool, and yeah, like you said, different uses for different companies, different rockets. So obviously, New Glenn's looking to do that vertical landing, and Vulcan's looking to do the parachute.
And liquid natural gas is predominantly methane, right? Mm-hmm. So do you think
Mars.
In the future, Mars? Yes, exactly what I was getting at.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's really important right now that we start really incorporating using liquid natural gas, methane-based, because if you plan on obviously making our journey over to Mars, you're going to want to be able to find a way to repurpose what you can find on Mars and use it as fuel, because when you get there, you're going to be all out of fuel. So it's good that they're able to incorporate that. It's extremely important.
We're going with the rockets of the future.
Yes.
And speaking of Mars and the future, Jay, tell us a little bit about what's going on with Mars. And that was a totally winged segue.
That felt right. All right. So, Lisa, so there's been a very, very interesting new look at old data that has to do with Mars's two adorable little moons, those little potatoes we know and love, Phobos and Deimos. And this comes from the Journal of Geophysical Research Planets. And essentially, this is data that we were able to get from NASA's Mars Global Surveyor. And get this, we may have an alternative explanation as to how these moons formed, where they came from, why they are there, and everything else you could potentially want to know about this adorable little thing. And
how do we think the moons got there at the moment?
Well, Good question. So based on what we can observe right now, it's pretty popular to believe that these were captured asteroids. The reason we think that is because the surface of these moons is quite a bit darker than Mars itself. That's due to a presence of carbon, and also because it's so tiny compared to Mars, it basically has all of the evidence of being an object that was captured in the past. And actually, if you were to look at these moons in visible and near infrared, they do look like D-class asteroids.
Cool.
However, there is one big piece of controversy that always surrounded Mars's moons being captured objects, and
Are they hollow?
Yes! They are hollow, full of delicious chocolatey nougat. I'm kidding, that would
Yes,
be
I
wonderful. But actually, less exciting, their orbits don't make sense. So if you were to ask an orbital dynamicist researcher, they would say, well, if you trace back the orbits of Phobos' motion over time, the features of the orbit do not allow for it have being captured. And that's actually pretty interesting, because what that means is one of the most popular theories about the Martian moons has a huge hole in it. And so looking at this data from the Mars Global Surveyor, which was measured using the tool, the thermal emission spectrometer, I just had to say that because I just think it sounds cool. Basically, they studied the heat signature of Phobos and Deimos. And although they are quite cold objects, using mid-infrared lengths, compositionally, these moons look more composed of basalt than anything else.
Hang on, what else in the
Wow.
solar system is made from basalt?
Us, our surface, our moon, yes. So basalt is just volcanic rock. So if you were to study the moon, that's what you have on the surface of the moon. And that's how we surmise that our own moon was a part of Earth at one point, because it's compositionally very similar to our crust. And so because it looks a lot like basalt, what they did was they compared this data with various samples we already have here on Earth, including terrestrial rocks, so rocks you'd find in your backyard, as well as a meteorite from an asteroid believed to be similar to the ones that Phobos and Deimos may have been a part of at one point. And what they did was they found that the data, if you compare it, actually more closely resembles the terrestrial basaltic rock versus the asteroid, or the meteorite we got from that asteroid. And so what this means is if you were to connect the dots, that means the moons may have been a product of an ancient impact within Mars's first billion years of life, which is fascinating because that's exactly how we think our moon may have formed, with Theia bonking into our Earth, and then voila, you have a moon.
So are they just made just from Mars rock or just from the impactor?
Good question. The answer is it's sort of a love child. We don't think it's 100% one thing or the other. It would be more so a fusion, a mixture of these materials, and what you have is a beautiful baby potato that orbits you day in and day out.
Speaking of potatoes, why are we so interested in Phobos and its potatoey shape?
Well, personally, I think it's fascinating because you have these two conflicting theories that are just, directly you kind of fight each other, but both are just as valid in terms of the evidence they have going for them. And the more we know about moons, the more we know about the moons of Mars, the more we can know about moons in more distant parts of our solar system or moons around other exoplanets. And if you want to bring it back down to the, looking for life argument, moons are amazing opportunities to study the potential for life outside of our very own planet. So the more we know about it, the more we can potentially explore these worlds for a critter or two.
You've convinced me I want to go to Phobos now.
I mean,
are there any missions that are going to go there and
absolutely
go to Phobos?
If you've been tuning in, you might know that we actually now have the capabilities to have return missions. So we actually have, for instance, Hayabusa 2 and OSIRIS-REx, we have capabilities to bring actual physical, tangible samples back to the surface of the planet to study. In fact, JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Agency, is developing the Martian Moons Exploration Mission. It'll launch in the mid-2020s, but it's essentially going to travel to a Martian moon and bring us back a little piece.
I'm so excited that. Can you
I
imagine?
hope there's chocolate nougat.
We could make a necklace like your necklace.
I was going to say,
out of
search
Phobos.
Etsy. I'm pretty sure you're going to see
Etsy,
some
yeah.
Martian moon jewelry
I'm so into
yeah.
that.
for $1 million.
All
wonder
right.
how much she'll bring back.
Speaking of things you could buy with your money, if you
Oh.
would like to support the shows of tomorrow, I'd love to give a very huge shout out to all the people that already do. So we have our lovely citizens. So thank you very much. We could not do this show without your contributions. Specifically, our Escape Velocity citizens. These people contribute $10 or more per episode to this show and make this show happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. If you'd also like to contribute to the shows of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. Now, before we go to break, we're going to try something a little bit new this week. So, Space Mike, what have you got for us?
Well, we are going to be trying something new, and before we get started in our primary interview, we're going to ask a couple of questions. We're going to take just 60 seconds to ask a few questions, general questions, rapid-fire lightning round, just to get a little bit to know you a little bit more as a person. So there's no right or wrong answer. We're looking for short answers in your own opinions, and just something to get you to know you a little better. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. What is the earliest dream that you can remember that you've ever dreamt?
Wow. Probably roller coasters. I'm thinking roller coasters.
How many marshmallows can you fit into your mouth?
0.
0. Cable or Netflix?
What was the first option?
Cable or Netflix?
Netflix.
What's your favorite music genre?
I'm gonna go. Let's see here. I'm gonna say roots, reggae, and dub.
Nice. Reggae dub? Something like that. That's good
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Dr. Phil or Dr. Oz?
I don't know. I've never paid more than 5 seconds attention to either of them.
What is your favorite book?
Let's see. I'm gonna go with Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy.
Nice. Commercial space or government-led?
I'm gonna go with government-led.
Okay. Cooking or baking? Oh, and then we're out of time right there. But yeah, cooking or baking? What's your answer to that last one right there?
I think baking, because that's more baked goods. You can get that involves like bagels and toast and fun stuff like that, like
There
carbs.
you go. There you go. Now here's a question I want you to take a little bit more time on before we go into the main interview, which is what. Okay, never mind. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break and check out the calendar for upcoming launches. And then I'll ask you that all-important question and quite a bit more when we come back. So stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more with Chris Johnson from the Secure World Foundation.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
And welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. Real quick, I wanted to introduce you to Chris Johnson. He is a space law advisor for the Secure World Foundation. He's also an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University and has worked with the International Space University as well as UNUSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. So we're going to be talking a lot today about space policies, space laws, what you can do, what you can't do in space, and how we are trying to enable the world to have access to space. So again, thank you very much for joining us and talking with us today. First off, I wanted to ask you about the Secure World Foundation and what it is that you do for them and their mission and how they're trying to enable space access.
Certainly. So Secure World Foundation is a private operating foundation. It's an NGO, non-governmental organization. And it's a very small NGO, and honestly, there's hardly any NGOs that are specific to space activities. And our focus is on peaceful uses of outer space, international cooperation for outer space, and the continuing use of outer space for human and environmental security here on Earth. So it's tying what all the things that we do in outer space and our capabilities with space, how they tie back to on Earth to benefit people on Earth. And it's preventing conflict in space. So what you do as an NGO, you're a very small player. You're not a state, you're not a space agency, you're not a government, you're not an international organization like the United Nations. So you do what you can as an NGO. And essentially that's getting people to talk to each other, different stakeholders, users of the space domain, to talk to each other, understand the issues that they face, that they all face, and getting them to empathize with one another. So it's facilitating conversations and being a good offices and someone who speaks for civil society. So if you have a meeting where there's governments and space agencies and the commercial industry, well, who speaks on behalf of everyone else? civil society, the rest of the world who has a stake in outer space. So that's what an NGO is tasked to do in the international political system, and that's what we try and do for space.
Wow, that's really inspiring.
It's tough work.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Let's talk a little bit about that, because from what I've seen, there's a lot of, especially third world countries, that are working on university projects with CubeSats, or even having higher ambitions to create their own space agencies. And what sort of difficulties and problems have you faced trying to help some of those folks? And what does it take to even organize to create a dialogue to get the right people speaking to each other?
Well, all right. I'll tackle the second question first. The dialogue to get the right people to talk to each other. I'll put it like this. Let's look at the small satellite revolution. The small satellites, that's often people's first activity in space. It's the, small companies, startup companies, universities that are learning everything that they want to do in space, but learning it on like a smaller platforms, small satellites first. If you're a startup company, you want to get to space, you want to prove your concept, you want to do it quickly, you don't want paperwork, you don't want long wait times, you don't want costs like insurance to slow you down. Because every day that you're not doing something in space, you're burning money. Time is, this is essential to be a success and show your success as a startup company. And then now let's look at the regulatory side of it. Let's look at the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU. For the ITU purposes, there's only two types of satellites: geostationary satellites and non-geostationary satellites. And whether your satellite is going to be very small, or whether it's a gigantic, pristine satellite the size of a bus, the filing fees, the wait times to get your frequency coordinated can be a number of years. So there's a huge mismatch in terms of the regulations that are in place, because they were put in place for traditional space, and the interest of, people who want to get to space and do it quickly. And both of them think that they're doing the right thing. They both think that they're good guys, and they are good guys. They both think that their approach to space is the approach that we need in the future. So you have to get those folks to talk to each other. You have to get the small satellite community to see the necessity and the utility of international law and international coordination and cooperation for the use of frequencies and useful orbits. So they have to talk to the ITU and see the goals of what the ITU is trying to do. So you have to somehow help those meetings happen, get those people chatting with each other and working with each other so that they can all do what they want to do in space, and they can do it in a sustainable fashion. And that's really the key, the sustainable fashion. So I use one example of small satellites and the telecommunications union. You can draw so many other parallels, the commercial space and what the regulators are tasked with doing. And the linchpin of it is Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty. States are responsible for our national activities. So there's what we call commercial space, but in the context of international law, all activities are national activities. So whatever SpaceX does in space, the U.S. government is, quote unquote, on the hook for that. They're internationally responsible for everything that private company does. And that's the way that space law is set up. Anything is a national activity. So you have to work with the regulators. You have to work with the government, have to get them talking. Governments and the U.S. government want to allow these things, but they're not going to bear all the risk.
Sure.
There has to be some oversight and some regulation.
What are some of the biggest difficulties that you've come across? Do you come across any sort of us versus them mentality, or is it really just a lot of the legalities?
I think there is us versus them mentality, not so much in commercial space and what the regulators want. They, the approach in DC and the approach from the U.S. regulators is they want to see space activities happen. They want to give a license. They want to see new non-traditional emerging activities. They want to see satellite servicing happen. They want to see, manufacturing in space happen. They want to see next generation space activities, use of resources in space, commercial space stations. They want to see it happen, but they have to make sure that it's going to comply with what the U.S. has obligated itself to do under international law. So there isn't that us and them mentality in terms of commercial space. But once we step over to the more difficult geopolitical realm of the security aspects of space and geopolitical tensions, then I don't want to say it's us versus them, but it's a uncertain system where you can infer or you can have a curious posture towards activities of other states.
So hypothetically speaking, let's say that you are in a country that doesn't have its own space flight capabilities. Let's say that you are in South Africa. Let's just pick that out. And you have a CubeSat project that you're wanting to build. What can you do and what can't you do in order to try to get that flown?
Okay. So there's so many different ways that we could take a question like that. I like the last aspect of it. What can you do and what can't you do? Because I want to plug international space law, and I want to get people aware of what international space law is and the content of international space law. And I'll explain it like this. You can go to the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs website and get the texts for free, download the PDF of what the space treaties say. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, the 1968 Astronaut Rescue and Return Agreement, the 1972 Liability Convention, the 1975 Registration Convention, 1979 Moon Agreement, and then succeeding General Assembly principles and declarations. And, it won't take you long to read these core treaties. And what treaties do is they establish rights. On the one hand, you have the right to explore and use outer space, and those rights are balanced against obligations. And those obligations are, you must register your space object with the United Nations. And there's positive obligations. You must go and do this. If something lands on your territory that was launched from another state, you have to return it to that state. You have to offer it to be returned. And those obligations can also be negative obligations in terms of you cannot do that thing. You cannot, appropriate places on the moon as part of your national territory. You cannot place weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons into Earth orbit or station them on celestial bodies. That's a negative prohibition. So what space law does is it balances rights and obligations. And, but the key to understanding all of it is it's very limited in scope. There's a lot of gray areas and unanswered questions in space law. The Outer Space Treaty is a treaty on general principles, and it was intended to be a treaty on general principles. So if you look to the treaty and say, where does it say I'm allowed to put up a commercial space station? Is it either positively permitted or is it explicitly prohibited? There is no answer on it. It doesn't mention commercial space stations, just like it doesn't mention manufacturing in space, use of space resources, satellite servicing, deorbiting, space debris, removing space debris. It is silent on all of those questions. It's a limited regime of general principles. So once you understand that, you then have to say, okay, well, the law isn't clear, either giving a green light of go ahead or a red light of no, you can't do that. It's what would we like to do in space, and is there a prohibition on doing that in space? And so that's where it gets tricky for developing nations and states that are not space accessing. They don't have their own, launch capacity, launch capability. They're encouraged to do international cooperation by space law. And so they're going to use space assets for their national goals, whether that's remote sensing and land management or GPS, PNT type of applications, border verification, et cetera, et cetera. And then slowly from there, they build up their capacities and use of space. And that's encouraged.
Related to a third world country and also who's responsible, there's a question from our chat room from Jarnis, who is commenting on Twitch, that asks, what about a company, from example, Brazil using a SpaceX rocket? Who's responsible for that? Would it be Brazil or the United States? And I think you kind of answered that already. Since it's SpaceX launching it, that would be the United States who's responsible. True.
So it's, other people get kind of... they get bored or they get upset if you give them a kind of a legalistic answer or you encourage them to go actually read what the law says. But it's pretty clear in the Liability Convention and the Registration Convention what a launching state is. And there's 4 categories of launching states: a state which launches, which procures the launch, or from whose territory or facility a space object is launched. So you could say that, if it's a SpaceX rocket, the U.S. is definitely a launching state. But if the Brazilian government procures that launch, they could quite easily be also considered a launching state. Or if it's a company that's headquartered in Brazil, it's easy to see, and a strong argument can be made that Brazil is also the launching state. So launching state, that's who would be responsible for any physical damage in space or on the surface of the Earth or in the air. And that's for physical damage. So, both the U.S. and Brazil will be interested in supervising and authorizing that activity to make sure it complies with international law and their national approaches. It could be the responsibility of both, joint and several liability under space law.
Interesting. There's another question.
Was that a long legalistic answer? I'm sorry.
No. That's okay. That's okay. That's why we're here, to kind of translate all this legalese, right?
Okay.
There's another question from our chat room that is kind of related to that, especially when it talks about debris. This is from Destructor1701 in our chat room that asks, space debris cleanup is a hot topic lately. How do you see the legalities of that panning out? Who can touch what, and when does an asset become junk from a legal standpoint? Law of the sea? Question mark.
This is a great question. A series of questions from Destructor 1701. Thank you. So space debris is not essentially addressed explicitly in the Outer Space Treaty or any sources of international space law. It's we have a definition of space object, and if the space debris. It's all right. So here are things that are unclear under space law. Can you remove your own space debris? Likely, yes. But can you remove another state's space debris? Like I said, neither the green light of go ahead nor the red light of no, you can't. We want to be able to do these things. Governments want to allow these things to happen. So like the technology may be sound. There may be a business case for it. There is a business case for it, but guess what? If you have the technology and the capability to remove debris, you have also the technology to remove someone else's satellites. You have the technology. You have a satellite killer. You can take someone else's space infrastructure offline. And because of that, if you are in the guise of putting up a space debris remediation mission, states may go, well, that's what they say they're doing, but what are they really going to be doing with these space assets? So it's unclear what, it will raise tension with that. Right at the end, he writes, law of the sea, is there a parallel? There is a parallel in some senses, in some economic senses, and space law developed in a way that is, kind of modeled after law of the sea. They're different domains with different special laws, but they're both areas outside of states' national territory, where states extend their jurisdictional powers into those, what we call the commons. Space is not a global commons, but economically speaking, it is a commons, in the sense that we all share it and have access, we all can share it and have access to it. And so there are some parallels with law of the sea, and we can certainly look there. There's salvage law in maritime law, but there isn't in space law. And that's one of the things that we need to develop. And whether it's going to develop through a new international treaty or, actions by states that permit space debris remediation, we want to make these things happen, and the clock is ticking. We want to start removing space debris as soon as possible, especially the large stuff that can cause more debris, or the small stuff that can interfere with our assets and capabilities, especially in the low Earth orbit and medium Earth orbit.
Very interesting. And that kind of brings me to how far it goes. This is a question from Lur in our chat room, who asks, does space law extend beyond lunar orbit?
Yes, definitely. So we don't know. There's no lower delimitation of where outer space begins and where airspace ends. But essentially, space law, and this is one of the interesting things that got me into it, just the scope of it, the ambition of what space law seeks to address and regulate, regulates humans' activity in outer space, but space law governs launches on the ground, space activities on the ground, use of space for remote sensing looking at the ground, but then it also governs, it's everything from what happens in low Earth orbit and beyond, including what happens on celestial bodies, the use of frequencies, the use of orbits, and there's no hard binding international law of planetary protection principles, but there are COSPAR guidelines for planetary protection principles. And yeah, so that the scope of space law is essentially, unlimited.
Very interesting. And this brings me to another interesting question from Destructor 1701, which asks, in planning laws, you must take into account the future context of that law as much as you can predict. What sort of strange considerations have you found yourself taking when thinking about the space industry and culture of the future?
So, the first thing that pops into my mind from that is, asteroid threat mitigation. If there are asteroids which would threaten the Earth, threaten destruction on the Earth, standing up missions to deal with that debris or deal with that asteroid threat. The technology to do that is essentially, like nuclear weapon technology, even though it would not be a weapon in the traditional definition of how we consider weapons in international law, especially the law of armed conflict, whereas a weapon is targeted towards a foreign enemy with military purposes. This would be merely a repurposed nuclear weapon that would be a nuclear device to destroy an asteroid headed towards the Earth. But there are these difficult issues. Like I said, Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty says that states are prohibited from placing nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction into Earth orbit or beyond. So can you lawfully use a nuclear device to destroy an asteroid? It's an uncertain question. Hopefully, but again, we don't have a clear answer on that.
Makes me wonder if that situation were to happen, if maybe the UN could be the authority that's actually launching the nuclear warhead. And I don't know if that'd be a way around the law, or if that would be something that at least the signatories, excuse me, I can't even speak right now, would agree to, is if the UN was the one coordinating that effort.
Well, if you want to get into it, there is two bodies that work out of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. One is the International Asteroid Warning Network, IOWN, and they're tasked with detecting the asteroid threat towards the Earth. They're one working group and one working body, the IOWN. And then once, if a mission needed to be stood up to face this asteroid threat, it's the Space Mission Planning Analysis Group, same page. So Same Page also works out of the Office for Outer Space Affairs, or USA is the secretariat to Same Page, and that would be the international body that coordinates a mission to destroy asteroids that threaten the Earth.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I have a couple more questions from our chat room that I'd like to ask. This one comes from Hanny's Vorwerp off of Twitch, and they ask, what old laws are holding back the growth of a 21st century space economy?
Oh, this is a great question. So, the law works on precedents, and we'd like to not invent new things, but look to what has already been done, what people already use, and what can be proven to work. So this is why, wills and trusts, writing up a will, you look to what's worked for, the last 100 years. Property law is descendant from Old English law, American law. The common law system comes from the English common law system of judge-made law in addition to what is written in statutes. And, our ideas of property law actually stem from the Romans. So we have lots of Latin terms in national law and lots of Latin terms in international law. So when we discuss, the use of space resources, we can be using Latin phrases that were used in the Justinian Code from the 4th century AD of res communis omnium, res nullius, of areas that things or areas that are able to be appropriated or not able to be appropriated, or not able to be appropriated, but we can use them for commercial purposes. That's res omnius. That's res communis commercicum. So, we're using Latin phrases from 1,500 years ago and applying them to the space domain in a way that's analogous, and we use them as general principles of international law. Of these general principles that could be hundreds or over 1,000 years old, and because space law is a branch of international law, and general principles of international law apply to space, then we can get dragged down by using Latin phrases for the space domain.
Sure.
I think it's not something that we should be doing, but that's what happens.
That's why I call it legalese, and that's why we need folks like you to help us figure out what the true purpose is behind a lot of these policies. I have a few more questions that are related. First, I wanted to ask, Tickle Stuff in the chat room asks, what happens when satellites are launched unlicensed? For example, the two startup satellites that were launched on an ISRO rocket without U.S. government clearance. And then I have a follow-up question to that, too.
So, I wanted to add to the previous question, we are bound by laws, but laws are supposed to serve people. So whatever the laws are, we should be, as the current generation, not bound by what the past has always done. We can make new and better laws. So, that's always the overriding goal, is that the rationale, the deep rationale behind law is that it can order life. It put guidelines for life to make things better, to make, the living situations better. So the laws can change to, make a better future. So this question has to deal with, the Swarm satellite launch that the company did not do their frequency coordination with the FCC. They launched anyway. This was kind of unprecedented, and the first time that such an activity had happened, where they didn't get their frequency coordination license from the FCC. They and then just decided to launch anyway, and to don't worry about it. We'll turn our transponders on after it's already in space. So that's not a good move. It's not a good look. It will not be good for that company in the future. The next time they approach any regulatory body for a license. It's not good for their reputation. It's not good for people who want to invest in them. VCs don't want to invest in companies that take shortcuts or try and short circuit the system or do end run around the law. The U.S. government would be a launching state for that. They'd be a responsible state. I've spoken both with folks in the U.S. government and with the folks from Indian space lawyers, and who will admit that India is also, of course, a launching state and probably a responsible state for that activity. The good thing is I think that those satellites are in a low orbit, and so they'll burn up and re-enter the atmosphere and completely burn up. Not in 25 years' time, but in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. In fact, that launch was a while ago. They might already have burned up, from all I know. But to on this subject, To Wicked from our chat room asks, recent history has shown that treaty violations don't see much action from the other members. Do you think it would really be any different hundreds of thousands kilometers away from Earth? And something that I kind of to add on to that, who is responsible for kind of following up? If someone does break the law, how are they going to be punished for that? And would it be other members' responsibility to kind of, my mind goes into like bigger army diplomacy type of thing. How do we make sure that these treaties are held in place? And if people violate them, who is responsible for penalizing them?
Yeah, great question. And this gets to the heart of international law as its difference from national law. I saw a good tweet the other day of the phrase that international law is a system of peer pressure, of you can try and force other states to comply with what you've agreed the law is. There's no set in stone enforcement mechanism for lots of laws. There can be adjudication through the International Court of Justice when states agree to it. There can be adjudication in bodies like that. But, if a state violates international space law, other states that feel affected by it and aggrieved by that action are no doubt working with that state in other areas besides space activities. They're working with that state in the economic realm, in the security realm. There's consular and relations that they have with that state. And so there's basically a whole basket of options that you can kind of pressure that state to cease violating the law and begin complying with the law and promise to not violate the law again. There's a whole suite of options, and the one that U.S. government likes to use is sanctions and affecting their trade and their economy. You hit them in the pocket, and that's really where you can have some type of pressure on those states. And even though states do violate international law, they always say, well, we're not violating the law. The law exists. We're bound by it, but there's some special exception where we're not bound by it. So even in the breach of the law, when they get called out, they still say, they don't say the law doesn't exist. They say right now we're not bound by it. There's some extenuating circumstances behind it. But yeah, that's the trick. And we'll admit that that's the international system is based on kind of peer pressure and good relations. And if you're known to be a known persistent violator of international law, it kind of gives you a pariah status where states know about your bad your reputation and don't really want to enter into new treaties or new arrangements with you because you can't really be trusted by any document that you sign.
Interesting. Well, this kind of brings up another point that makes me wonder about transparency and whether or not they should be communicating with each other. This comes from a question from Neuropilot in our chat room, who asks, I thought that there was a de facto agreement to notify the United States, Russia, and China of launches to avoid misunderstandings of possible ICBM launch. Could something similar work for certain activities that are not settled in the treaty?
Yeah, definitely. So we definitely do have those security assurances and transparency assurances between states. That's what we try to do with international law, is say, we will let you know. We don't want to have any type of, the phrase is misperceptions, misunderstandings, and anything that could lead to tensions rising between states by what is essentially innocuous activity. So that's what we need for space also, and we need these types of transparency activities. So getting back to, emerging activity in space is satellite servicing. We want to go up to satellites that are non-functioning or misfunctioning or in the wrong orbit and move them out of orbit, put them in the right orbit, move them to a graveyard orbit, deorbit them, or service them by refueling them and repairing them. But the technology to use that can be kind of suspicious looking to other states.
Could be an interceptor.
If you have a satellite that has scissors and snippers and the ability to interact and perform those rendezvous proximity operations on satellites, that can look a bit threatening to states that, may not believe that you're going to do what you've said you're going to do. So the only way to solve that is through transparency and by letting states know, this is where we're going to go. This is exactly what we're going to do. And do it in an open and transparent fashion.
Wow. So what's next then? How can different member states that are already part of the treaty and people who want to participate in spaceflight in whatever capacity, how can we get to a point where we're more transparent with each other and the process of getting through the red tape and being authorized to launch is easier? What sort of steps need to be taken in order for an international collaboration to happen?
We have to decide what needs to be done on the international level and what is best done on the national level. The U.S., Luxembourg, maybe some other states soon will have passed laws or will pass laws dealing with the use of resources in space.
Yeah.
U.S. government creating law that says U.S. entities, citizens, and corporations can own and possess asteroid resources. So that's an action on a national level. Luxembourg also has done that action, saying it is capable for Luxembourgish companies to appropriate and use and own and trade in and sell asteroid resources. Again, action on the national level. Some people said, no, that needs to be an international discussion with the new treaty. But creating a new treaty for that type of activity may take 10 years or longer. That's how long treaties sometimes take to negotiate, to go through all the work and processes of that. So in the meantime, would that stifle activity? So, there's strengths and shortcomings of having new international law, new treaties. There's strengths and shortcomings of having new national law. It's going to be up to people in all the stakeholders for space to say, this activity, say it's satellite servicing, can be mostly regulated on the national level. But we're going to have some type of international safeguards in place to reassure states that may be curious or hesitant or suspicious of that type of activity and may think that it's not merely for peaceful commercial purposes, and they may suspect that it's actually for security military purposes. But it's going to be on a case-by-case basis for, say, satellite servicing has different geopolitical repercussions than space debris removal, and again for manufacturing space, for use of space resources, for commercial space stations, etc.
Interesting. There's another question from the chat room from Tawicked that asks, in your opinion, should the United Nations create their own orbital tracking projects so that there would be unbiased open data to all members so that hopefully situations like what you just described could be avoided?
The thing about the United Nations is they can only do what member states ask them to do and also give them money to do. And that's the goal of it. And so you can ask them to do something, but until you actually also fund that program and assist them in standing it up, they won't be able to do it. So I think that something like that, the UN international approach, it could take quite a long time. And I don't know. Hold on. Can you show that question again?
Yeah.
Let me think about it a little bit more.
Tawicked asks, should the United Nations create their own orbital tracking project, like TDRS, or I forgot what the Russian one's called, so they could have an unbiased open data to all members?
Huh. I mean,
I really like that idea. I think that would be great because let's say, for example, if someone said, oh, hey, the Russians just launched Cosmos 5437 and we think it's some sort of interceptor, United Nations comes out and they're just like, actually, according to our orbital tracking data, it's in this particular orbit, it's not rendezvousing to anything else, it's this particular size and shape and it's transmitting these signals, so it's this type of satellite, not this type of satellite. Like, would that be feasible?
Some type of like unbiased referee or commentator that can say, we know for certain. I don't know. I mean, the U.S. doesn't really, or the UN doesn't really have that specific role in other domains. They don't do that type of activity for like the oceans or airspace. It's done on a national level. And then, like the space situational awareness, SSA, it's space traffic management, STM, they're very difficult and probabilistic. You can't exactly tell where a space object is. You have basically a cloud of probability for where it, like a zone that could be many kilometers across for where you mostly predict it is. I don't know. And beyond that, I don't have a strong yes or no opinion on that. Maybe it's possible.
Interesting. Well, kind of going back to funding for a moment, where does Secure World Foundation get your funding from?
NGOs usually have a number of private donors. We have one private donor that stands up the foundation that also has, the family also has other NGOs that deal with like piracy on the oceans. So we have one NGO that is focused on peaceful and sustainable uses of outer space. One is on, oceans and the use of the oceans and preventing piracy on the oceans. And, that's essentially what NGOs try and get up to and do roles that governments are and no one else is doing. And they usually come from like private backing.
Interesting. Okay. That makes sense. I do have two kind of random questions. This first one comes from Minnie Stoge, who is our own Lisa Stojanowski, and she asks, is the Kármán line recognized in space law?
No, it is not. But that doesn't mean it's not an important line. So for folks who don't know, Theodore von Kármán, is that Theodore? Came up with, an idea of where space should begin based on where air gets so thin that above that, essentially, wings of aircraft don't have any lift. And above that, you'd need to put something in orbit. The technology would be different. And I think it was originally set at, was it 100 kilometers?
I believe so, yeah.
But he also admitted, and this is, just something done within I think it was the IAF in the 1950s. He admitted that as technology develops, that line may move around. So if you really want to get into, I know that one of the world's most renowned experts in space and space technology, Jonathan McDowell, published a paper updating that perspective on the von Kármán line and where he would set the lower boundary of outer space. So you can find more. Just Google Jonathan McDowell, and you can find stuff from that. And I think his paper is open access.
Awesome.
Looking at where to draw a line. I think he draws it slightly lower, but it has no legal repercussions or merit behind where you draw that line.
Sure. And I know I think the United
currently.
States Air Force, I know they used to, I don't know if they still do, but I think they had their line at like 80 kilometers or something like that. And then depending on who you ask, they're like, well, it's as soon as the atmosphere stops, but there's still a tenuous atmosphere, thousands of kilometers up. So it gets confusing there. But thank you for answering that. I have two more questions from you. This next one comes from our chat room from Dutta, who is our producer, who asks, are other countries as sensitive or suspicious as we, the United States, seem to be about what other states are launching?
Some are.
Some are.
You have to have your own verification system. You have to have eyes that are looking to space, and eyes in space to see what's in the space environment. And I think, but no matter what, you have to, states are encouraged by international space law to register their space objects with the UN Registry of Space Objects that you can find on the USA website. Objects launched into outer space. It's done pursuant to the 1975 Registration Convention and also UNGA Resolution 1721A. So you're supposed to register your space objects. And that's really just a transparency measure to say, well, this is what we've launched into outer space. In addition to that, you have to coordinate your frequencies with the ITU. That's not a transparency measure solely. That's also so that you can use that frequency and you don't interfere with other uses of that frequency, and you know who else is going to be using that frequency. So there, essentially can't really hide what you have in space for very long. People will find out about it, and if you don't coordinate their frequency, you will suffer frequency interference.
Interesting. Okay. So I hope that answers your question. Now I want to ask you a really important personal question. And this is something that we try to ask everyone. And I'll just throw it right out there. Why space? Why are you doing this? And what excites you the most about space right now?
Oh, okay. How much time do you have?
Take as much time as you want.
What's that?
Take as much time as you want. Why space?
Okay. So I went to law school in New York. I was not, and I went to Michigan State University. I got a degree in literature with philosophy and sociology. I was not in any way science or engineering or STEM minded whatsoever. I was, definitely social sciences, literature, and philosophy minded. But, I hung out with people that watched Star Trek, and I watched Cosmos in my high school physics class. It was awesome and amazing. But I never connected it with anything that I would want to do, or that I aspired to do. But then once I started working in the legal field, and I did, commercial litigation, trial preparation, and stuff in New York City near Wall Street, I took a night class in international law, and in that international law class, they discussed maritime law. And another chapter discussed aviation and space law. And I remember reading that while my day job was in the financial services industry and the legal industry, totally the other end of the spectrum. It had no relation to outer space whatsoever. And I was just shocked and blown away by the fact that there was something called space law, that there was an outer space treaty, and that there was an astronaut agreement and a moon treaty. And it just seemed so surreal, science fiction-y, almost slightly unbelievable that these things, existed, and that people took it seriously, and that it was a branch of international law, and that we have lawyers that do space activities. So I went to a few conferences. I came down to Washington, D.C., and went to a conference that happens every December, the Galloway event, and met people that work as space lawyers. And was blown away that these people could exist, and that's their living. They're serious adults, and that's their job. I'm a space lawyer. And so because of that, I think I want to get into this. I think that this is, so why space is that, it's looking towards the future. It's premised on, people that work in the space industry are always thinking about, this launch is coming up soon. Next year, we're going to do this. Next year, the spacecraft is going to get to this planet and observe this planet. It's looking towards the future, visions of the future, planning for the future. It's explorational, and it's not looking backwards all the time like many other fields do. So because of that, that was intriguing to me, and I like that aspect of it, that it's forward looking. I also like the aspect of it that it's something that you're taking part in a greater endeavor. You're not taking part in something that is solely for yourself and your own profit, that there's a global space industry, a global space conversation, a global space endeavor that pushes forward what humankind can do. So when imagine we will have the technology to perform satellite servicing or manufacturing in space or use of resources in space or, asteroid threat detection and mitigation and response. These are like civilizational milestones that that are just astounding and humbling, that you could take part in something that now you're part of a species and a civilization that can do these things. Don't you want to be part of an industry that is achieving these hitherto undreamed of milestones? That's unlike other areas of professions that you could work in. That type of pushing civilization forward doesn't happen if you work in tax law, for example, or if you work in property law, or many other areas of law that could be fulfilling, could be profitable, that serve a purpose. But for me, I have that type of anxiety that I want to know that what I'm doing has a greater purpose besides myself, and that it's something that is fulfilling. Even if I have a very minuscule, infinitesimally small role in pushing things forward, it's fulfilling to know that you're taking part in pushing something forward.
Wow, that's awesome. Great answer. That's exactly what I'm all about. Thank you so much. We definitely have to have you come on the show again. There's so many exciting things to talk about and so many questions that we didn't even get to. So we definitely have to have you come on again sometime. But thank you again so much for joining us and for answering our questions today. Now, before we get going, yes, thank you. You are welcome to stick around, by the way, if you want to in After Dark. Otherwise, you're good to go for here. But for the rest of you who are watching, please stick around, and we are going to have comments and questions from you, the community, that we are going to address. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons who are supporting TMRO. These are our escape velocity citizens who are contributing $10 per episode, and you guys are really making the show happen. I am just so blown away by your guys' generosity and your support. But we also have our orbital citizens who are contributing $5 per episode. And you guys are, oh my gosh, you guys are really making the show happen. And I, again, just thank you so much to each and every one of you for your guys' support. It really means a lot. But if you would like to contribute to the show and help us out, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so that you're notified anytime we have a new video. Share this video with your friends. And if you would like to support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/TMRO to help us do even more cool stuff. So stay tuned. We'll be right back to talk about your questions and comments.
Science. It both draws us together and tears us apart, brings discoveries to cure us and threaten us. It is neither good nor evil. It is what we decide to make of it. There is so much more to learn, and we are curious. Together, let's explore the science of tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Oh, hey there!
surprise!
It's us! Hey, community. So,
I got it.
I totally had that. Whatever.
I know, but I'll take the blame for this. So, y'all did not like the 60-second questions. You made that very apparent, but we did work it in such a way that we had an easy edit point in case we didn't like it. And Chris did a great job, Mike did a great job, but the segment did not flow correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to reset really quickly back here in the newsroom. We're going to re-record after the Patreon slate's out, and we're going to cut the 60-second segment out of the show entirely. And that's part of the reason why Space was at the end of that segment. So that's part A. Part B is this was an incredibly interesting interview. You all had incredible questions. I think everyone absolutely loved it. But where we really struggle is finding a catchy title for the episode that makes you want to click on it and watch it.
Because we're not clever.
Because we're not clever, right? Makes you want to click on it and watch it. Isn't false, right? We don't want it to be a misleading title, but
We don't want
properly
clickbait.
conveys like this is really cool and exciting stuff. As you, I mean, the chat room was just lit up.
Lit.
It was
Absolutely lit. So
Whoa, welcome to 2018, Ben.
Why space lore is lit?
Objection!
Why space lore is lit
Objection!
AF?
Objection! It was on fire.
Jeez,
So,
that could have been
your help
good.
in the chat room. Titles for this episode that you think would be good. That would be.
Destructor 1701 had what I thought was a good one. He said, "Can we actually do that?" Question mark. The future of space law.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And I did take a note of that. But if you have ideas as well. So, all right. So we're going to reset.
Right.
We're going to do the outro. Then we're going to have to take another break to reset again because we didn't have a chance to do that in comments.
Sorry.
Chris, I can't hear you. But know that if we're absorbing your Saturday. So if you want to hang on the line, cool. It was awesome. Otherwise, you're not required to stay any further. And although I will say that community
awesome.
loved
Yeah,
you, and we
so
would
cool.
love to have you on again in the future because this was just absolutely fantastic. This is stuff that we in the space community don't normally think of, and as soon as you start peeling away at that a little bit, all these questions start bubbling up, and you're like, oh my god, all these things I didn't think of. So it was really, it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, one more time.
I think we should be able to hear you now, Chris.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not going to stick around because I have to get off to the airport and head off to IAC. But I wanted to say thank you for having me on the show, and I wanted to let Ben and Carrie Ann know that I paid attention and watched when this was Space Vidcast, I think in like 2011, 2012. So when it was, I think it was like out of a coffee shop in like Wisconsin or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Minnesota.
I remember
You were close.
seeing
Yeah,
that and just
Minnesota.
like you guys were a very early inspiration for me being like, oh, there are other people out there that are interested in space that talk about it. These people are educating me on what's happening in the space field. I saw you guys speak, I think at an ISDC in Florida in 2011, 12, something like that on social media and space. So I want to thank you. It's been a while since I've paid attention and tuned back into Space Vidcast. Now it's TMRO. But I'm so impressed and inspired by what you guys have done and
Well, it's funny,
continue to
full
do.
circle
And
because
the
your
show is
entire interview
excellent
was
these
very
days.
impressive and inspiring. So, thank you. It was absolutely incredible, and thank you for the kind words as well. But go catch
Awesome.
your flight. Go,
Yeah,
go to
get
IAC.
out of here.
Go to IAC.
Go ahead, Mike. Tell us all
Go
about
do
it.
the fun stuff. Thank you. Thank you.
Take
All
care.
right.
Thank you.
On that note, we're resetting. We're going to start with the slate. Come back, and we're doing this for continuity's sake. So
Are we coming back to me at all, or is it just Lisa?
no, it's just going to be Lisa, but we need you there because we can see you through the window. Yeah, exactly.
True.
All right, start with that.
Blah 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 blah. Patreon.
.com/TMRO. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to have Space Mike interviewing Chris Johnson. This is the future. This is tomorrow.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
No dying. Rule number one.
table goes. Maybe here?
That looks pretty goodish.
Or do you want it like
So I like to hang on. Yeah, I like to kick it this way. I like to kick it this way. So there you go. A little bit further. A little more like this.
Oh, bang.
Yeah. So then we can hopefully we don't shoot off the screen.
Capcom should be in the middle.
But I like to shoot because Letta built this huge beautiful set, and I don't want to shoot out of the big huge gaping hole. I like to show the big beautiful set.
Oh, Athena, do you mind if I?
Yes. This one.
This is you?
Yeah. Here, why don't you sit here, Athena?
Small one, so it'll be like. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
How's it going?
Or I could just like sit on a cushion or something. I don't know.
Wait, what?
Height wise, like it feels more balanced now, right? Height wise.
Sure.
Otherwise, it would be like.
Just do that small.
Just be less small.
In space.
Small.
Somebody tell Ben that it's awfully dark.
Ben, it's awfully dark.
Hang on.
No, that came from me.
Oh man. Let's put this
Well,
back
those
in.
plants are so much.
Whoa, they've grown
Is
so
your-
much
Than last
since the last
week.
time I saw them.
Yeah.
Is your mic off again?
No, I have it on.
I'm only hearing you through echo.
Oh, she's
Hello,
probably
hello.
muted on the audio
Hi.
board.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on.
I have the
Green light means on.
Right.
My space is already got
No light means off.
Y'all are
I
funny.
don't know what red light means. It probably means it's going to explode or something.
That would be horrible. Maybe like low battery.
So
Oh, probably.
I propose a new show after
TMRO.Space law.
Yeah, well, Space Court featuring Judge Dutta.
Like instead of Judge Judy?
Yeah.
Judge Dutta.
I refuse.
That's funny.
Okay, so when do we start?
What I tell you to?
Okay.
Okay.
I feel like I look extra red than usual. Is Ben painting the cameras or something?
Painting the cameras red. I don't know if anyone got that reference. Alice in Wonderland. Thank you.
Yes, I did.
That sounds violent.
It does sound violent. I mean, yeah. I'm glad someone got that.
All right, here we
Alice in
go.
Wonderland
Here we go.
reference.
And thanks for sticking around. Now we're going to get into your questions and comments from you, the community of tomorrow. Now, if you weren't here last week, we had an amazing roundtable that was consisted of Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, Anne-Marie Stagmer, Nicole Stott, and Neve Shaw. And we were talking about the Dear Moon project and how amazing that was and inspiring for all of humanity to go and explore the moon together. And our first comment for today actually comes off of YouTube, and it's related to last week's show. It's from Hanafi Din. And they say, well, scientists couldn't draw or paint or have that appreciation of nature to save their lives.
I don't know about y'all, but
Yeah, go. What do you
oh
think?
yeah, no, I feel like we were all just vibing on the same wavelength so hard. I didn't know if I should just say it, but I mean,
Yeah.
was this? I couldn't tell. First of all, is this sarcasm or were they?
No, this
is
seemed
straight up.
legit to me.
Oh, okay,
there was a comment
okay.
thread that started in YouTube, and like people were like, "What are you talking about? Scientists don't know." And this person was like, "Well, you know, they don't. Scientists are trained to be analytical and to communicate in a certain way that is good for communicating data to other scientists, but not necessarily communicating that
In an
data
aesthetic
to
way.
the wider world, which is why science communicators exist, right?"
Well, okay, I can agree with that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that scientists can't draw or can't create pieces
express
of art.
themselves creatively. I mean,
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
Einstein. He was a huge piano and violin fan and player. In fact, if he wasn't a scientist, he says it, himself. He would have been a musician had he not taken up science. And then even Feynman, Richard Feynman was a very dedicated painter. So to say that, I mean, I think it's kind of an insult to the scientists to say, well, they couldn't do that to save their lives.
And even just talking about space, I mean, astronauts. We had both Alexei Leonov from Russia and Alan Bean from the United States creating incredible pieces of art
How could you
based off
not
of
be
their space
inspired
art.
after seeing that? Exactly. And so, yeah, I think it's a little unfair to say either, oh, artists don't have the capacity to be scientifically minded, or scientists don't have the capacity to have an aesthetic appreciation or a creative kind of outlet like that.
Yeah,
Kinda
every
like-
scientist I've ever met or interviewed or worked with, I would ask them, if you weren't a scientist, what else would you do? Every single answer has always been like a polar opposite of what science really is. So every single person I've met, it was either they want to do musical theater or they want to be a musician, and like same. And it's weird because a lot of us might know that with music and music theory, it really goes hand in hand with mathematics. So there's so much intertwining happening between science and math anyway. Sorry, science and art anyway. Whether or not maybe they're not aware of it, but yeah, most scientists they have like a whole other passion that they do and career.
So we have a great summary of all of that in the chat room. Aspen says, people are multi-dimensional.
Thank you.
Yes.
People are human.
Yes.
All right.
We have layers.
So that actually
Like
leads
onions.
in really, really well into our next comment. So from YouTube, Evan Smith says, I personally don't agree with that A joining the letters of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, A standing for art. There is a reason STEM is separate from other disciplines, and although there could be important existential meaning in the art that would be inspired and produced during a lunar orbit, these products will have varied meaning to everyone and little to no utility in furthering the much more challenging art of spaceflight. Ready, go.
Once again, I disagree.
I'm going to call it ironic. He called it the art of spaceflight.
Right? Oh, there it is. We need say no more. Yes, we do. Go on.
I think that art in the context of STEM is really important, and that's where this whole STEAM thing came from. It's not art just for art's sake. It's art for the purpose of expressing science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah. Exactly. And not only that, but I mean, art for art's sake is important in and of itself, but it's not just the production of art, it's the creative thinking that comes along with it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like that they do mention how is this relevant to the challenging art of spaceflight. I mean, this is all about design thinking. This is about engineering. I mean, the innovations that are going to take us to places beyond what we can imagine is going to require thinking, I mean, I hate to use this cliche, but outside the darn box, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you need that. You need STEAM, not just, you don't need just S or E or A or M or T. You need them all together. The future is interdisciplinary. So.
Exactly. I actually love what Loopy Dragon says. STEAM is Carl Sagan's cosmos.
Heck yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, it's, I mean, even like the movie Contact as well, too. Like, well, the book first and the movie. But yeah, I think that it's just exactly what you said. You know, it's also about trying to relay that information that's gathered through science into an artistic form. Because it's also about trying to reach the broader public, you know, everybody in the world, not just the science community, but even then too is, yeah, a lot of science stemmed from creativity, philosophy. I mean, astronomy stemmed from philosophy, and philosophy came from creative thinking. And, you know, all of that, it's a constant evolution. So just because we know something now doesn't mean that we can't rediscover something or discover something later on. And a lot of times that comes from thinking out of the box, which a lot of times is out of the box of science. So since everyone isn't scientifically or technologically literate, sometimes that whatever piece of art that does express that is what inspires people. Like in my head, I'm sitting here thinking about this whole Dear Moon project, and what if there's some really inspiring pieces of art that makes Congress go, oh, space is awesome, let's double NASA's budget. Let's double the budget. Yeah.
I mean, you never know if that it could take that one congressperson just being so absolutely awe-inspired and then kind of taking that back to their constituents, and then just there's so many benefits to making art accessible, making STEM accessible to, you know, society on a general scale. And I mean, yeah, if you want to get things done, you have to make it impactful to Congress. You have to make it impactful to the people who have effect on policy.
The voters too. Yeah.
I was just going to mention, I agree mostly with what you guys are saying, but also if A should be related to the rest of the letters in STEAM, then why in universities and such are they so segregated? Why do you have, you know, a college of science and whatever, and then you have a college of arts and humanities, and they're not together?
Good point. I think, I mean, well, traditionally, I mean, if you are going into one field or the other as your focus, then yeah, there should still be like not an exclusivity, but there should be like a pretty, I think, prominent focus on one thing. But I think that as you kind of get a little bit further into your academic career, that's when it starts marrying. So say you're like an engineer and you are working in a fab lab. I mean, that fab lab, theoretically should have, you know, artists and designers should have access to that fab lab as well, because then you have...
What's a fab lab?
Oh, sorry, fabrication lab. Like, so for instance, like with 3D printers, laser cutters, things
like a makerspace.
A makerspace, precisely. And so, I mean, even in like high schools and colleges, they're experimenting with this, giving access to students from basically any department. I mean, so long as they're, you know, adequately trained by the staff, and having them minds kind of come together. So while maybe it's not in the curriculum itself yet,
it's the future of education.
Exactly. The application, therefore, is more synergistic.
Awesome. All right. Let's switch over to a little bit of a more technical question. This one comes off of our community forums from Sean Devine. And they ask, does anyone know what is used to insulate the super chilled fuel storage tanks? This is in relation to SpaceX. I'm from the area near Boca Chica Beach, and I can tell you it is way hotter than Florida or McGregor. As of today, McGregor, Texas is 82 Fahrenheit, 28 Celsius, while Brownsville is 32 Celsius, 91 Fahrenheit.
So the fuel storage tanks, we're not talking about the tanks on the rocket itself, we're talking about the tanks at the launch pad. I have no idea what the insulation's used.
Vacuum jacketed insulation.
Vacuum jacketed insulation, thanks to Dutta. Thank you very much for that.
So, I mean,
Google food
does
is
it
strong.
does it matter? Does it matter that Brownsville is so much hotter than McGregor, Texas? As a human, we perceive that as hot, but is it really that much of a difference, to the fuel that is already at this really low temperature? Like,
As long as you have the proper insulation.
It will increase the boil off, and then in doing so, increase the pressure in the tanks, and all that needs to be managed.
If the temperature rises and gets above a certain point.
Yeah, blame that on the day job.
awesome.
Okay.
Cool.
Wow.
Well, here you go. Community, your questions are answered here.
We give you what you want.
Okay, so next week we have a really cool guest coming on. But before I tell you who that is, we're going to do this really amazing thank you to all of our guests. Not guests, patrons.
Or patrons.
Patrons! You're amazing patrons, I love you! Escape Velocity patrons contribute $10 or more per episode. Thank you so much. We could not do this show without you. But we also have our Orbital subscribers as well, who contribute $5 or more per episode. Thank you so much. We couldn't do this show without you, and honestly, it just blows my mind that you guys are so invested in the show. But we also have our suborbital citizens who contribute $2.50 per episode, and I'm going to keep talking here so you have time to find your name on the screen. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate what you guys do for us. But we also have our ground support citizens as well, who contribute $1 to $2.49 per episode. And again, thank you. Hopefully I can say thank you enough times that you can find your name on the screen. This list gets so big every week. The font is getting smaller and smaller. Eventually, you're going to have the best eyes in the world to be able to find your name. And we probably should come up with a solution for that. Maybe we need 2 slates. I don't know.
Microfiche.
Maybe.
Anyway, thank you so much. And if you would like to contribute to the shows of tomorrow as well, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. And honestly, if you can't contribute financially to the show, you can always help us out by sharing with your family, friends, people at work, just anyone that you kind of talk to about space and be like, yeah, these cool things are happening in space. And if they don't know, show them our show. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to get people excited about exploring the cosmos.
That's right.
Yes.
But speaking about things that are cool in space, next week, oh my goodness, I'm so excited for this next guest. Next week, we have ALE, or Astro Live Experiences. We're going to be talking to Josh Rodenball from ALE, and they actually do on-demand shooting stars. We're going to be talking about how we can all experience a meteor shower together wherever we are on the planet with on-demand meteor showers.
That sounds dangerous.
That's pretty epic.
I mean, maybe it
sound
is dangerous.
really
I guess we'll
It's just
find
little
out.
speckles of maybe just like Salt Bay.
that Salt
Maybe
guy.
shooting Star Bay.
That still sounds dangerous.
Oh my goodness.
That still sounds dangerous. Ooh, man. So you're going to have to check out next week to find out how that works.
It's going to be I'm really excited. And next week, dun dun dun, we have a doubleheader with Tomorrow's Science. Do you guys know who we're interviewing on science? I'm so excited to announce this right now.
Oh my God, who is it, Lisa?
We are going to be talking live with a station in Antarctica inside a greenhouse that is making the future of how we create food on this planet and off this planet.
Amazing.
Oh my God.
Live from Antarctica.
Live from Antarctica.
It's going to be so cool.
Will there be polar bears?
Cool.
There are no
hope
polar
so.
bears in Antarctica, but there are penguins.
Will there be penguins?
Maybe. You'll have to watch next week to find out.
So
Science-
excited. Pumped.
Science, you can join us at 2030 UTC next week, and Space will be on at 1800 UTC. But until then, After Dark is up next. We did miss a comment in this week's show. We're going to talk about it in After Dark. But until then, we'll see you next week. See you later. Bye.
welcome to After Dark. Oh man, clap, 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 clap.
Sorry, I totally skipped the last comment and didn't tell anyone.
I was like,
Because in my head I was like,
okay.
we're going along. This one doesn't add
with it.
anything. But it is cool, so I still wanted to talk about it after talk, which is why I shouted out to it.
after dark, after talk.
So there was this really cool comment in the community forums. It came from, let me scroll back up. From Folks. And they're referencing After Dark from last week, and they said, "Can I just say the crew's poses at that timestamp in After Dark reminds me of Da Vinci's Last Supper," and I have the accompanying image.
Oh, that's
Violent.
I want to post this on the gram.
Oh man.
Very nice.
Especially because we have Vax too. I feel like that just kind of makes it.
It makes it. It does. It does.
Vax is sort of. Who's in the middle
See.
though? Oh, Tim
Tim Dodd,
Dodd.
the everyday
Tim
astronaut.
Dodd, the everyday
Yeah.
astronaut.
And he's like a bit higher than everyone
Yeah, I was gonna say
else,
you even
and we're
have
all
the
looking at him.
triangulation of that. That's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Like his arms
Illuminati
are out.
confirmed.
Who's Judith?
Oh man.
Well, if someone in the community can paint in a Renaissance style, we'll be happy to.
Oh, I didn't post it in the community forums. It's going to be amazing.
We'll hang it on the ceiling.
I want to be the person who has the hand on the other person's neck as symbolism.
All I know is I went bang in the middle, just.
Oh, I have the tiara. The tiara is being delivered right now.
We'll need to get some Wonder Bread that
There we
he's
go.
slicing.
Wait, and
Very
yours
We
nice.
have
are?
Linda Bread in our
we
freezer.
have
That was
it-
the last one.
No, it's not. No, the other one's still around.
Oh,
we have,
okay,
we have
okay.
a brand new,
What's that?
space-focused, tomorrow-specific tiara.
Oh, I'm so excited for this.
Wait,
It's on its
dear
way.
Lord.
It's so good.
does it have a rocket ship?
on it?
Okay, don't spoil it. I'm excited.
spoil it.
Wait, where do you order it from?
No, you don't.
Where do you
No,
find
you
it?
can't. It's
you
custom
can order it
made.
from you. Yeah, you have community members like Vax design it specifically for you.
Oh my
Print
god.
it, and then deliver
So
it.
Vax is now a fashion designer. That's cool.
Yeah. I just
Actually-
got super distracted because we're also over there.
Yeah, I tried.
Oh, that's weird.
Oh yeah.
So I also wanted I want to talk about a couple things, just housekeeping notes for the show really quick. The first is we'll talk about that 60-second trial that we did today. That comes out of a desire to, a couple desires. So first, there's a weird transition from the newsroom to the interview between the breaks. It feels like you're almost changing shows. And I'm trying to find a way to tie the two together a little bit better before we go to break. And so the idea was you toss back out here, you do quick little things to maybe kind of get to know the guest a little bit, and then go to break and then actually start the real interview. So yeah, I understand you guys didn't like it, and I think part of where it didn't work is that the questions weren't related at all to space, and so we didn't really actually learn anything relevant about the guest with those questions.
What?
So what we might try doing is just changing the questions so that they're a little bit more relevant to space and like really, they still need to be really, really fast, like A or B type questions, but something industry relevant. Might be a way to fix that. I don't know. Maybe it just simply won't work at all. That might be the case too. But I don't want to just.
People can't hear you.
I don't want to just give up on it because we tried it once and it didn't work. Right. So it didn't work. I agree that it didn't work. But maybe there's a way to make it work and make it awesome. You know, frankly, the first time we did Launch Minute, it didn't quite work either, but we could see where we needed to get to with it. And I think we did a pretty good job of getting to where we needed to get to. Now it's one of my favorite segments in the show, personally at least. I think it's really great. I think we can do something similar with these questions. I don't as easily see how to solve this one, and I'm open to opinions. Maybe it's not solvable. Maybe it doesn't work. That's okay too. But like, that's the energy and the thought behind it. All right. The second thing is, we're working on really making the chat experience for tomorrow epic. You know, this show is about our ability to reach to you and talk with you and have your questions asked on the air. It's yes, we're all about this relationship. Otherwise, why be live, right? If we didn't care about the live audience, then we would just pre-record the show, take out all of our mistakes, so you would never get to see the tomfoolery, and then just post that as a show. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's all about the community, and that community is driven by our chat room. And you know, it's been kind of a hobby project for a little while. We're taking it out of hobby project mode and moving it into, we're serious about this. This is going to be an exceptional experience for absolutely everyone moving forward. And to that end, we're going to need some help. So if you're a programmer, or if you're a designer, or if you've got anything that you think could contribute to chat, maybe moderation skills, anything that you think is chat related, head on over to community.tmro.tv. There's a new Tomorrow Shows like code area type thing where we're talking about the chat room. We're getting a repository for the chat room so that we can have multiple developers work on it. Colton is still heading it all up. He's going to be in charge of this whole thing, but we're putting a lot more emphasis on it. And we're going from this kind of mode of like, it's whatever you can do in your spare time, and whatever can be done to it needs to be solid, it needs to be exceptional, it needs to be world class, and just up to the quality standards of tomorrow. So we could really, really use everyone's help in every regard with the chat room. Also, feedback, ideas, thoughts on what you want changed, thoughts what would make it better. Even if you don't have the ability to code something, if you have an idea as to what would make the chat room better, definitely leave that in our community room. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Enough of me rambling on my soapbox because I made the entire conversation die. So there you go.
Okay.
So lightning round questions. Someone said, less weird questions would be help. Would it be better if we had space-specific questions? Like some of the questions that I didn't ask today, but that I've put into our list. We literally have hundreds of questions that we've all submitted. Was like Apollo or Soyuz, SLS or Falcon Heavy, those type of space questions. But mine are all hardware questions, but like, A or B type answers. Would that help to have space-specific type of lightning round questions, or do you guys just not like the lightning round at all?
I think the marshmallow questions what threw it off, and I'm actually the one that came up with that. I'm so sorry.
That's when my
field. It's like
my interest peaked at the marshmallow question. I was like,
really?
how many can you fit in your mouth?
Because the answer was none. So
I think if you were to keep going, I think having both, like maybe intermix random weird questions. So it's like space, 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 marshmallow, space, space, space. I don't know, random. So it kind of throws them off a bit, but in a fun, playful way that mixes things up.
But then the question, should we continue?
Well, someone did say though that we should introduce the guest prior to the questions, and I think we mentioned it, but I think that kind of threw up because then people are like, wait, what? Like, so where are they from? What do they do? Mm-hmm. So I guess, and that was something I read about an hour ago. And so I think that might be a good suggestion, like just before we go into the lightning round, give like a quick brief on who they are. I mean, it's important, I think, for us either way to edify them rather than them kind of tell who they are to the world.
My concern with the placement of the questions, I think To Wicked actually had a harsh but very correct comment. He said something along the lines of, tomorrow always finds a way to get you uninterested in the guest prior to the interesting part of the conversation, something like that. No, again, overly harsh. But
we get it though.
But there's I get it. There's truth there, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to have this segment just for the sake of having this segment. Like it has to actually add something and get you interested in the guest. And if it does anything other than that, it doesn't belong on the show. So if we can't turn it into that, we shouldn't have it in the show. I feel like we can turn it into that, and that there is something that could be here. But if it's not, then it goes away.
Matt Eddy from YouTube says, what's wrong with just who are you, where do you work, and why are you interested in space? We've been doing that
interrogation style. A while. Why do you want to date my daughter?
We cover all that in the interview, though.
Yeah.
We do go through that in the interview.
I mean...
I understand, though, like, what we mean by, like what Ben's saying, how there's, like, an immediate cut. I have the microphone in my hand. How there's, like, a cut going from the newsroom to here that I mean, those of you guys, obviously, that have been watching, you know what's expected next, but for new viewers, it does maybe seem like it's a second show that's starting. So I think it's about trying to bridge that connection. And, I mean, I'm glad we keep the windows open so you can see what's in here. But I think it's a matter of whatever, like, I don't know, creative directors out there, if you have recommendations as far as like how to really bridge those two scenes together, because that's really what it is. So I get it.
It's about keeping that. It's about keeping that flow that we have that's going on in the news. Because we roll through news. We do the launch minute. We go into another story. We go into this story. We go into this story, and now we should go into the interview. But it's really difficult because we have that disconnect. There's an actual sort of gap that ends up happening, and we're trying to figure out how to cross that gap. We're trying to build the bridge over that currently.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, that's That's where it's born. That's where it comes from. If this doesn't solve it, that's fine. But like I said, if this doesn't solve it, that's fine. This is where it's born. This is where it comes from. But we're very open to feedback. Obviously, criticism. Like, I heard what you said. We're cutting it out of the show. I get it. But yeah.
Tickle Stuff brought up the guest was stalling trying to compute the answers.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was kind of almost our motivation because we had the standard questions that we asked everyone. And sometimes the standard questions would take like 2 to 5 minutes. And sometimes the standard questions would take like 10 minutes. And like, I don't know. I think that we were all starting to get a little frustrated with, at least from my perspective, of taking up so much of the interview on whether or not those 5 questions are going to go good or not.
Yeah, the standard questions don't make sense. The only question of standard questions that I think does make sense, and the only one that should stay, is why space. And as you notice, we actually kept that in this show. That why space has never been a question that has been ever on the table to go away. I think it's an important question that every guest should answer. So I have no intention of making that go away.
Almost asked that right off at the top at the end of the 60 seconds.
You know,
Because
actually,
that's something that we had discussed, and then
that might have been a better way, because then at least we would have had some space questions in there, and like we would have learned a little bit about the guest. But as it sat, we didn't learn anything about him. We didn't get to know him better. We didn't feel more connected with him. It was just this weird, awkward 90 seconds for no reason. So it just didn't work. Hey, look, we tried it. Like, sometimes we're going to try things that'll work great. Sometimes we're going to try things that don't. That's how it works.
I think the questions
so
were
just let me keep messing with the show and understand that if I try it, it doesn't work, I'll make it go away.
I think a lot of the questions were
It's
too
a constant
open-ended.
experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, too open-ended. They need to be, A or B, or just a real quick yes or no.
Anyway, so I didn't mean to take it over. Cool. So I'll let you guys go back to it. I need to go edit the show so you can get it online quicker, stuff and things. But I just want to do a little bit of those housekeeping things. And again, please, we're really trying to make chat awesome. Anything you guys can do to help for chat. There you go.
Yay!
Cool.
Space Cal says, awkward is the fuel of tomorrow.
Awkward is the
Space
feel
Cal.
of tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
I
Shall
can't
we,
get to it. You're all
holding
talking
this.
too fast. Oh, there we go.
I do like, though, I'm just going to bring one thing up, that Aces King says, let the guests make comments on the news, possibly, because that happened one time when I brought on my old mentor, Dr. Lou. He kind of jumped in on the news, even though we usually like to keep it at a certain time, like 30 minutes. That
You
caused
mean
a
15
big
minutes?
connection. Oh yeah, 15 minutes is supposed to be. Okay.
I was like, when did this become 30 minutes?
But that felt like a really strong connection where people already heard all this stuff from the guest, and then they were even more excited for the interview by the time he actually started. So I think that, I don't know if you guys remember that at all, but
That was an awesome moment, but it's only viable if the guest has
they
knowledge
really
about
know
the
exactly.
news.
Right.
Yeah, experience.
For a space lawyer talking about a BE4, and, I don't know, looks
Mr.
cool.
Dr. Charles. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
We can't put that pressure
We
on
can't
them
put it
to
on them.
jump in. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so where were we back at?
Galactic MD says, I love the space interrogation round. Today's execution was the first and albeit a bit rough, but I really think the questions are great at the end of the interview, though.
Yeah.
At the end of the interview, though.
Well, the thing, I kind of agree.
But then
just
at that point, you
because-
already. Oh, yeah.
No, I know, because I know the original purpose was to make a smoother transition from news to interview, but I feel like it makes more sense at the end because it's kind of more of a fun thing. It's kind of more of a, okay, we went through all of the serious technical interview stuff. Now let's get to know a different side of this person in a way. So I can kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah,
I feel like the energy, because news energy is kind of up here, and then interview energy is kind of less, but for longer. It's more sustained. And then if we did a lightning round at the end, it would pop back up again. But I don't know how that's going to play out until we actually try it.
Yeah. And I mean, well, what about you viewers? Do you think that the difference in tempo is like jolting? Is it unsettling in any way? Or are you like, are you okay with like news, bam, 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 and then smooth jazz through the interview?
Twicked says to go full on TV, build one large desk in the main studio, fake the wing desk out of MTF, and when news ends, pan the camera to interview. The part feels like 2 different shows because you are keeping them 2 separate shows.
I feel like that would be amazing, but we're not going to get anything fancy like that for like the next 2 years at least.
I'll get like a GoPro and just like all of a sudden go selfie style as we're like ending like Citizen Slates, and then we just like walk out. I'm like, so now we're going over to the interview, and then I pass it to Mike,
Well,
and then
that
he
was something-
starts. I'm just totally joking, but
That was what Destructor 1701 was kind of saying, to
Oh.
cut to in-studio camera through the window, showing the news host's back, and then whip pan to the OBS lounge. I'm having a hard time imagining.
I feel like that would
So
be
like
almost,
the camera would be
I can
pointing that
picture
way,
that.
and then you kind of just pan it around to over here. But that would require a person on the camera.
I
which
know,
we
it
don't
sounds
really have. I mean,
difficult.
it'd be cool to see it, try it. Why not,
I
right?
love selfies.
I like the selfie stick idea because that feels like it's
All of a sudden,
because
like selfie stick comes out
that's
when
why
Citizen Slates
that's
go
why
away.
vloggers do that because it's a style that automatically kind of connects you with that person,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
more relatable, more personable, and more casual.
I mean,
So-
I have a selfie stick.
Oh my god! But then how
course
do we
you
get
do.
the selfie
I
stick
thought
camera
those were-
into the switcher?
Puppas are illegal now or something.
Yeah, you're like not supposed to use it in museums. Like I remember at the Intrepid, every time like someone pulled out a selfie stick, all of a sudden security's like, "I'm sorry, please don't. You're gonna touch the shuttle."
I know we're anti-selfie stick at Griffith
To
now.
Wicked. Stop thinking about ideas that scare viewers away.
Selfie sticks are scaring viewers away.
Jump cut pewdie.
And now we introduce you to the shaky camera to the next scene
The
segment
shaky
of our
camera
show.
of tomorrow.
It has to be like way up
I'm
here.
gonna
like,
stabilize her like a gimbal.
Like, if that's what we're gonna do, it might as well start like outside, and you're just like walking outside,
Right?
and the next thing you know, you're.
and then it really is
IGTV.
I should walk
IGTV.
towards the
It'll be
camera,
welcome
pick
to the
camera up,
neighborhood.
and then
Right?
just
Shaky cam.
No, Jared will be
Should we do the Star Trek thing? We just
Dude.
get hit with a torpedo?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
Everybody to the left. Everybody to the right.
different place.
Forward.
Blair Witch style.
Somebody needs to make a gif of that.
And have the camera all shaky and
Wicked, I'm
everything
looking
too.
at you.
Yeah, get on it, to Wicked.
To Wicked is
Come
like
on.
the
Oh, man.
designated meme maker of tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh no.
Which reminds me, I owe you 25
But yeah,
bucks.
what if
I
like
forgot.
right when we're ending news, someone reaches towards the camera, grabs the camera, and then pulls it and puts it in place for the newsroom? Is it too much?
So they pull it into here, and it like blacks out, and then it's like a complete jump cut to like coming back out here.
Oh, it's gonna be like
I'm
a
not
fun
doing that.
90s music video.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking about.
Or what if
NSYNC.
we do it Star Wars style and
Backstreet
everything
Boys.
slides away?
Ooh,
Raj
like a weird
Luthra
transition
on
where it's like a
YouTube
cube,
brings
like
up something
iMovie.
that I've thought about for a long time. How about introducing music in the background during the interviews or throughout the live stream?
Money.
Really
That's the
hard to
quickest
pull off
way
and
to
money.
get the YouTube algorithm to hate us.
We're not using other people's music. We're going to be making our own
Why?
music, damn it.
We got the sickest
Next
rapper
minute-
on the planet right
Next
here,
minute
man.
we still get copyright
Okay, I'll bring
notifications.
drums.
Incorporate this line.
There we go. Boom.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And you just hold it, and you're like, okay, now we're gonna go into.
But
the
how
Alright,
do you
come on
get it
over
in?
with me,
Right
and
over
we're
with
gonna.
me. We're gonna go here.
Yeah.
Do you like make it? Do you,
shake
it's like an extra Zoom channel,
is that a
and you
jib?
call in with the phone.
Yeah, so so I can't.
Like
Like
connect
the camera
it.
doesn't connect to like Apple TV. I have a drone in the other room
Or
too.
Zoom or something.
Oh yeah,
like
someone
that.
said drone.
Oh,
yeah.
Does a drone fly in?
What about?
Now let's move to the other room.
Yes, can we do that?
Everybody down!
If we're gonna
Take
do a
cover.
drone,
Duck and
we
roll.
might as well bring a buoy into this.
Y'all feel like
there we go.
potentially dying?
Oh, for the Ethernet cable, right.
Oh man.
Oh man, okay.
I
I
wanna
need to
get a
catch up
drone.
on
And
this
here we
because-
see in his natural habitat, wait, Ben Incredible of the House Higginbotham, the first of his name, the unshaved Princess of Tomorrow, Space Vidcast in the first segments, Princess of Station 204, Khaleesi of the Great ADFC, Duchesses of Shining Screens, Breaker of Norms, and Brother of Cameron.
Wow.
That is so good.
I feel like
That was amazing.
Get Smokey a drink. That's amazing.
I feel like
Smokey a Soma bar!
Yeah.
he has had
Wait,
this
were we
written
gonna
and
get
he's just
that?
been waiting to
know
post
where
it
it
this
is.
whole
Yeah.
time.
We've been saying we're gonna get the Soma bar.
So,
for a couple
about
months.
so wait a minute. When this new tiara arrives, does that mean that Ben has gotten a promotion? Is he now His Royal Highness the Queen? And if so, do we need to have a coronation?
This is getting...
My family could
We
do the
can throw
flowers.
glitter!
Yes.
Yes!
Oh my goodness!
I'm gonna get a glitter gun.
Okay, okay, guys, no, seriously, the next Patreon...
Y'all can do all that shit outside.
Thank you.
Just
Voice
like
of
MDF.
reason.
The next Patreon hangout the next Citizen Hangout is going to be the coronation of Princess Incredible of tomorrow.
There we
We're
go.
going to roll the red carpet down those stairs, and we're going to have that, camera on the stick thing.
And watch him
And fashion
promptly trip
designer
and break his ankle.
Both of them.
Is this something you want to see? You should leave a comment if you want to see it.
Yes.
Why, this actually does sound magical, and I feel like it needs to be a thing that happens.
Yes.
His Royal Highness is on
It's gonna be
board.
just like we're gonna do this outside, but we should be just throwing glitter everywhere.
Yes.
For the reason
Okay,
it's
done. I know we're
And
going to
then
do
His Royal
that.
Highness is
flowers?
on board. Is
Jared knows
on
where we can
board.
get some great flowers.
Yeah, my family owns a flower shop. 'cause
And
I
we
come-
could have
I'm
Cannon
from a
and
long
Dee playing in the
lineage of rocket
background.
florists.
We need to
So-
be nice to the gardeners
can,
though
we
and
can
do
bring
it like
some flowers
before the
in.
show.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll like clean it up.
I have my bubble wand. We can. Oh my god, we can use the bubble wand as like the sword thing.
Yes.
throwing bubbles
I
as
love
you
it.
do the
Shoots
thing.
out bubbles.
And
We
can
will
have-
need like a
We should have
throne.
like 2 little husky plushes on leashes that are
We do
dragging
that at
around
the same
everywhere.
time.
Oh god. Oh god.
Yes! Can we make this happen? It's gonna be
And he
amazing.
needs like
I want no
a cape. so a
Like a-
glitter
yeah,
cape. Backside
yeah.
room. You're the fashion designer, please.
I love how Ben is intrigued by this and is just like, yeah,
This is great.
That sounds magical. That sounds great.
Tickle stuff. Let's not have that happen.
Wait, where?
You'll find it.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, no.
Nobody wants to see that. It's a G-rated show.
I don't know about G.
I'm gonna change the subject.
these
Bubbles
lights are
everywhere.
What Kelvin is that?
Yeah.
Oh man, it seems like everyone wants this to happen. Great. Videotape the entire way with Tesla Auto following him. God, I wish I could be there for this.
Oh my goodness.
This is great. Okay, so this is gonna happen.
No,
We
the
need to
Tesla
choose a
has to
date.
drive up on autopilot, and then he has to get out of the autopilot Tesla with no one driving in it.
Yes, this sounds like a.
But
great
it would be
plan.
better if it was an X, because then the doors would be like, ooh, and then he gets out. But the oh my,
okay.
guys, this needs to happen.
It's gonna be really good.
Yeah, I think it is happening.
I think it
Ben
should happen
gave
right
us
now.
His blessing. So.
I don't know how to
Do
feel.
you guys think that once per orbit we should do like a parody show, but not a parody
Yes.
show, but like I don't know, one
Yeah.
time like these guys dressed up once for Halloween, but like maybe near the holiday season we do like a fake, like a coronation, and maybe next year it can be, I don't know, something else, but we should
Yes.
do a parody show.
Yes, I think that'd be really fun.
As a giant fan of Ali Yankovic, I'm all for
Next
parodies
year.
of anything.
Next year, His Royal Highness will give us knighthoods.
Ooh.
Whoa.
Rub-a-dub-dub! Sorry, no one's seen that movie. That's okay.
Do I get shares in tomorrow with my knighthood?
A Minotaur.
Sure.
Wait. I'm excited though. We should just dress up anyway. When can we start dressing up for Halloween?
Stage Viscount of Australia.
Oh man.
Tomorrow the musical.
Yeah, so okay, so
wanna
this year
start
can
dressing
be Ben's coronation. Next year we can have Tomorrow the musical. The year after that we can have like a Tomorrow Space Awards kind of thing.
And then can we do like a Tomorrow epic underground rap battle? Like
Epic rap battles of
8
tomorrow.
Mile style.
Future
That would be
history.
really fun.
I can't.
Epic
so
rap
bad at
battles
rapping
of
too. I'm like,
tomorrow.
I know Mike's gonna win it. 'Cause you've never seen Mike's
Bigger!
Well, you guys have time to start practicing, start freestyling, start
man.
listening to instrumental music and freestyle
This
in the
is
car.
psychological warfare.
It'll be, you know,
He's psyching us
nonsense at
out.
first.
He's giving
Yeah,
us hope
get-
that we
get
can
your
be
flow
okay,
going, yeah.
but we can't.
Oh, careful, you might
I'm
trigger
so
the
bad at this.
algorithm.
Right?
So be careful, Athena.
Oh, we have another suggestion here of our parody shows. Can you do a puppet version of Tomorrow?
Yes.
Only if the community sends us the puppets.
Yeah.
But you have to make them in our likeness.
I'm wearing Christmas socks. Can I use those as a puppet?
I used
Please
to be a
give me
puppeteer,
eyes.
so I'm all down for this.
That'd be so much fun,
puppeteer.
though.
Yeah,
to,
at a
my
science
gosh.
museum.
I would be really bad, I think, with controlling puppets.
Tomorrow memes.
It was
They were
cool
just
because
so
they
good.
weren't just hand puppets, right? Like we had hand
Oh,
puppets,
like the-
but I also had a giant tree that I would like control the eyes and stuff, and then I had a boulder that I could like control the mouth, but I'd just be like resting my arm on top of the boulder.
Just like
yeah.
that. Like the thing on top. I used to have one with the,
Tars 1,
That's fun.
you inspired me to ask of the community tomorrow memes. If you have any meme ideas, please generate them, send them our way. We'd
And then
be
post
very
them.
grateful to accept them.
Community forum. We should start a section of the community forum just for memes.
Hashtag memes.
tank memes.
Please make them
space.
dank.
Yeah, that's one thing you could put on your cover.
Make
on
them
your,
stank.
resume, right? I made memes.
Yeah.
I was
made
the
dank
lead
as
meme maker.
Meme
for,
designer.
It's
Tomorrow
all about-
Studios.
I was
it's all about
the
people and
meme
culture.
manager. Memager?
I like that.
We just got millennial. The A in tomorrow.
Wait, where's the A in tomorrow?
Thomas Rathke.
There is no.
It's silent.
Oh, it's a silent A.
Tomorrow.
Hashtag.
Oh, we have something coming
What's
in.
Too Wicked doing?
That's amazing.
Excellent.
Oh my gosh.
Now
I
we
love
just need
this.
shaky camera.
That is so good.
This is the best thing I have ever seen.
Dear God.
This is
Thank
so
you,
good.
so wicked.
This is gonna make my day.
I'm not logged into Twitter. I can't share it right now. That's so good. Oh man. That's amazing.
That's
Destructor
so cool.
1701.
Ruh-roh.
Oh, we have another one? Guys, this is amazing. I love
Oh
it.
yeah, that one. That's a
Remember that one?
classic.
Yeah.
Own bug.
Are we doing this? Are we?
Oh, my pug.
This is just turned into the
Telescopes and supernovae, planets and asteroids, and oh my God, fuck! That's so excited for science!
Future's
It's gonna be amazing!
so happy.
I want to tell you about this telescope. It's so big.
I came in at the wrong.
Oh,
we
this is
stand
so
off Ben. This
good.
is the best.
This is amazing.
Oh man.
Oh, look
I
at
know.
all these on here.
I know Tawicked made a couple like Soviet-style posters with me on it.
Nice, like
I
propaganda
love those.
posters.
I should really get those. So,
We made Destructor like draw attention to themselves in the pub.
Tomorrow, kids.
Aww. We can all get little mini me's.
Is this like the next generation of tomorrow?
This
Wait, where are we getting the kids from?
This is.
Kidnapping. I mean,
What?
asking
I think
parents
he's saying
nicely.
that we're the kids.
can we rent
Oh,
a child?
okay, yeah, we can
Rent a child. Alright,
If only we
Rent
knew
the
people
child.
that had children.
We can rent a goat.
It's
Wait,
like-
guys.
It's
Oh,
like
wait, a goat? I want
Yes.
goats.
You know, like
No.
the fainting goats when they get scared, they're just like,
it's like Uber.
It's the
but for
best.
children.
okay, we're gonna rent a goat, and then we're gonna find some kids.
Dear Half
Those are
Moon, say,
awesome.
whoa,
I love
Andy
those.
Law
I'm
coming in
excused.
hot with the cool comments.
Yes.
They're so
Wait, what'd you say?
cute.
Not that I'm offering, but I do have 2 kids.
So we should rent your
Propaganda?
children.
Yeah.
We shall rent your children.
What are we renting?
Yo,
We're gonna rent a goat.
What if-
I actually don't even know.
I think to prevent
You
a,
rent a goat.
I think to
I'm
prevent
gonna
a
Google it.
visit from Child
Rent.
Protective Services, we have to deny this.
oh shucks.
Actually, there's a new thing on YouTube now. If you have any minors under
man.
18 in your show, you have to
A
like
time for
tick a box or
greatness.
something like when you
wow.
upload
right.
to the
Enchiladas?
This child was not X-rated in the making of this YouTube video.
I want you to
I'm
come over.
good
I'm
thing.
just gonna throw this article I found,
Mars.
which says everything you ever wanted to know about renting a goat.
Oh, good lord.
So there you go.
Wow, someone actually wrote that.
Can we open up an advice forum called what Andy Law said? # Dear Half Moon Table. And then you give us your questions about everything and anything, and we give you the best advice you could ever possibly hope
I mean,
to
isn't
have.
that what the third segment of the show is?
So there's a new
Give us-
a home on the community forum where you can write in to Dear Jade.
Ooh, I'm ready to mess up some lives. all right.
It's the new fourth segment of the show.
Be sure to read the disclaimer at the beginning.
Dear Ashley, that's me.
Should we refer to the comment section now as like Dear
Oh,
Tomorrow?
man, that went so bad.
Potentially? # Dear Tomorrow?
Dear Tomorrow.
Maybe not.
I'm gonna get how to
That's
rent a
us.
goat.
Dear Tomorrow.
That should be like its own
tomorrow.
special thing.
It
I
is a
feel like
special
we
thing.
need to. I feel like we should record funny stuff to be like rewards,
You
like
saying
for
this
patron.
isn't funny?
But
no,
then
no,
we
this is
would
funny, but like,
never
Yeah,
with,
record
I mean,
anything.
like with a little bit of production value
Speak
to
for
it.
yourself, Mike. Just kidding.
Excuse
I don't
me.
know. Sorry.
Wait,
Excuse me.
how do you count the goats and make sure you haven't lost any?
With Halter. We went over this last science episode.
Oh yeah, we should be using halter. They're old school. They use a counter. They use a little clicker. They
use
use little
technology.
clicker things that counts.
Not halter, halta.
Halter. That's what I said.
We're going to use AI
Halter.
and make
Halter.
them line up in such a way so that from the drone they spell out TMRO.
How do professional goats?
I love the
from
North
regular
Korean
goats?
newsletter lady.
What the deuce?
What? Where?
Have you guys seen the North Korean
I have.
newscaster?
She is excellent at her job.
What you gotta say?
I want to see.
Would you?
This is just amazing.
Oh, hi, YouTube chat. Here's something for you.
So yeah. So.
We do need a communist bear poster for TMRO. We do need that. Yes, we do.
Yeah. I just keep thinking about goats right now.
I am not Destructor 1701. I am not in LA permanently right now.
Oh my bad, sorry. Hashtag tomorrow ASMR.
No. All right,
Yes,
who's eating the
I would
pickle?
love for us to have our own fake commercials.
That'd be
I
fun.
brought that up the other day.
We
Yeah.
were talking about that.
Jared
Do you wanna
Head's
learn about
Mohawk
space?
Emporium.
Yeah.
Come on down to Elon's used rockets. You can get 10% off out there in the big town. Down here in Long Beach. We got it out in Hawthorne. We got it even out in Lompoc. Come on down to Cape Canaveral. There's no sales tax in Florida. But you do got to deal with the old people. Something like that.
Oh, that was so good.
Yeah, if we
Adding
had
Florida to the list of places that Jared has offended.
They got that with Iridium,
man.
right?
Oh, that was so good.
Wow.
Yeah, let's do commercials.
That'd
Okay.
be cool.
Alrighty.
Well,
Are we winding down?
such a great
guess so.
We're done.
I think we're done.
puddle of input from you
All
all
right.
today.
That was fun, though. That was fun.
Yeah, I know
Good
where
show.
to get a goat now.
And
I wanna do that
great
thing.
job on the launch minute.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks. I'm like, what am I
amazing.
high-fiving for? Crap. You want to know the thing is, though, it was right when the first one, I finished all my information that I wanted to say for the Ariane 5 rocket, and then I was like, oh, I still have 5 seconds. Let me jump into talking about the satellites, and then that went on, and I was like, oh, China's launching. So that had a panic moment. Also, my mic was not on, so
Could you hear the launch minute music?
yeah.
Oh, you could? Okay.
Yeah, I was able to hear a little bit of it, but I had to look up to know if it was ending or not because I couldn't tell. So I was like, oh, but yeah, I'm glad it wasn't horrible. I hope. But thanks for the high five.
Yeah, you
Yay!
did a good job.
Now
No,
we
you
need
did a
to
good
get a
job.
goat as a reward. Go rent a goat.
Obviously.
Obviously. If I get one, I'll bring it on the show. But yeah. Okay. Thanks
On
for the
that
amazing
note,
show, guys.
See you later. Bye.
Goodbye. Get a goat.